The tall man looks down and tells her she's hired, but Nomi can't even look up. She's just standing there crying and trying to process it all when her head starts spinning. She can't believe her luck and tries to remember exactly how her life ended up in this crazy spot. It's like a total blur, so she tries to take a deep breath to calm down. She tells herself to keep it together and starts to slowly introduce herself, saying her name is Nomi. She's got tears streaming down her face and looks completely overwhelmed by the situation, but to understand why she's here, we have to look back a little while ago. The scene shifts to Dasadasa village, a small spot located deep within the dwarf kingdom where an old man is resting inside his house. He calls out, telling someone that he has one last thing he needs to say before it's too late, and he reaches out to grab Nomi's hands. He tells her the truth, that she isn't actually a pure dwarf like everyone else in the village, which completely catches her off guard. Nomi starts panicking and asks if that means she isn't actually his daughter, while her dad just lies there in bed looking exhausted, but he stops her right there. He promises she is definitely his kid, but explains that since she's only part dwarf, it makes her a half-dwarf, leaving Nomi just standing there in total shock. She repeats the words half-breed to herself, as the reality of her secret identity finally starts to set in. Everything starts clicking for Nomi. She thinks about how most dwarves have brown hair, but hers was always bright blonde. She looks back at her own reflection and realizes even her body was totally different from the other dwarves, and it's finally hitting her that she really is a different race. Her dad explains that he never really cared who her mother was, so he doesn't have all the details, but he thinks she might have been a gnome with blonde hair just like hers. Nomi listens as her dad starts to drift away. He says her mother has come to take him, but Nomi panics and begs him to just hold on a little longer until his hand goes limp. She loses it, crying out for him over and over, but he's already gone. Things get even worse when the village head shows up. He hears her dad died and immediately tells her to get out of the house by the morning. Nomi is terrified and asks what's going to happen to her, but the guy doesn't have a single bit of sympathy because he just doesn't care. He tells her the only reason the village even put up with her for this long was because her father was still around, and now he makes it clear they don't want an ugly half-breed like her staying in their village anymore. The village head keeps tearing into Nomi, mocking her blonde hair and the way she looks. He tells her she doesn't even look like a dwarf and calls her disgusting, just making her feel completely worthless. Nomi tries to stand up for herself through the tears, begging him to let her stay because she can still do her work, but he's not hearing any of it. He grabs her arm and tells her to shut up and stop whining, ordering her to get her stuff packed right now. The guy actually throws her out of the house and onto the dirt, threatening to kick her all the way out to the surface world if she doesn't move, leaving Nomi sitting there in the dark all by herself, totally crushed by everything that just happened. She goes to say one last goodbye to her dad, telling him that she's officially being forced out of the village. Nomi looks pretty heartbroken as she tells him to at least have a good time with her mother on the other side, and then she starts walking away with nothing but a small bag, wondering what she's even supposed to do with her life now. While she's trying to leave quietly, she overhears a mean villager laughing about how the chief finally got rid of the nuisance. Nomi just looks back one last time, realizing the village chief and the rest of them really did just throw her away like she was nothing. The village chief welcomes a couple of his followers, telling them he's got some great news for them. One of the guys looks over and asks if they're actually allowed to live in that house now, and the chief confirms it, saying he finally cleared out a place for his son and his wife to stay. The villager sounds a bit surprised, asking if that house hadn't belonged to Nomi's family for a bunch of generations. But the chief doesn't care at all, bluntly stating that they just don't need any non-dwarves hanging around their village anymore. A woman nearby looks a little uneasy, wondering out loud if the guy might hold a grudge and try to pull something, especially since he was always messing around with those weird machines and contraptions. The chief just laughs it off with his arms crossed, asking what a pathetic runt like that could even hope to do. He tells her there's zero reason to worry because, once they're banished to the surface, the direct sunlight is basically a death sentence for a dwarf. He goes on to say that even if the sun doesn't kill him, the giant boars in the forest definitely will, just like they did to his father, leaving Nomi hiding in the bushes, absolutely terrified as she hears him say that her family has no choice but to die in a ditch somewhere. The chief just rubs his chin, complaining about how annoying the father and son were for always questioning the way he did things, and figures it's just good riddance. The village chief is still going off, telling his buddies they should celebrate that the half-breed and her family are finally gone. He calls for a toast to the good news, and Nomi hears every single word of it. She stands there in the shadows, gripping her clothes and trying to keep it together while they laugh at her. Instead of breaking down, she makes a move. She reaches out, determined to take what's hers and get out of this place for good, starting with all the essentials. She starts packing up her work tools and clothes, along with some magic stones and leftover materials they left behind. She's actually surprised that everything fits so easily. She thinks her mom's old bag is pretty amazing for holding all this stuff, even her handmade crafts, accessories, and all the little keepsakes she couldn't leave behind. Now that she's packed, she sneaks through the village under the cover of night. She finds a wagon and starts climbing inside, making sure to stay quiet so nobody sees her, and once she's tucked away, she pulls a white sheet over herself to stay hidden. She whispers that she's finally set, letting out a breath of relief. She's just glad she actually managed to get on the wagon without being caught by the other dwarves. She stares out from her hiding spot, realizing she has no clue where this wagon is actually headed, but at this point, anywhere is better than staying there. Hiding in the back of the wagon, Nomi hopes it's heading to her mom's homeland. She thinks if she makes it there, maybe people won't call her ugly anymore. The moon stays high as the wagon keeps rolling through the quiet night, and suddenly a guard's voice breaks the silence, mentioning they've reached Loserville 1-3. He tells the driver they're clear to pass, and Nomi can't believe it. Hearing the common tongue confirms she's finally on the surface. She realizes she needs to bail immediately before they get any further. She gets into a crouch, timing her move. She figures the wagon is moving slow enough for her to make the jump, so she goes for it but loses her balance. She lets out a yell as she tumbles straight out the back, hitting the dirt hard. Lying there on the ground, she's completely dazed. She tells herself this has to be some kind of nightmare. Then a memory of her dad flashes through her mind. She hears him saying that she needs to find a way to be happy, even as a half-dwarf. She reaches out into the emptiness, calling for him to wait, but the vision starts to fade away, and she suddenly finds herself standing in a completely different world. She realizes she's late and tells herself she has to get to work right now. Nomi starts remembering her old life back when the work just never seemed to end, and she can't even remember the last time she got any real sleep because her head starts throbbing with this sharp pain. It's all coming back to her now. Turns out she actually died from overworking and got reincarnated into this new world. And she finally gets it. She's not a regular dwarf, she's a half-dwarf. Going from a corporate slave in Japan to a blonde girl in a fantasy world is a lot to take in. Then she snaps back to reality and sees something that completely catches her off guard, making a massive guy with fangs look down at her. He calls her a little lady and says he's glad she's awake, but Nomi is totally losing it. She wonders if she ended up in hell because there's a straight-up ogre standing there. She starts panicking, telling herself there's no way she's just going to stay still and let this monster eat her. The ogre tries to keep Nomi still. He tells her to take it easy, because if she keeps thrashing around like that, she's just going to hurt herself. She starts yelling in pain and the ogre just sighs, saying he told her so. Some guy in a uniform steps in and says treating her injuries is the top priority. The ogre agrees and says he's on it. Nomi finally starts to calm down, but she's still completely out of it. She looks around and wonders where she even is. That's when she sees this incredibly beautiful woman with a monocle. She's just staring in awe, thinking how pretty she is until she notices the woman has these huge black horns. It's another shock that has her totally freaked out. The ogre looks at her and asks if she can actually understand them. He's confused about how she can even speak the gnome language. Nomi clears things up and says she definitely isn't a gnome. She tells them gnomes are fairies, and she just understands him normally. The ogre says that's a huge relief. He tells her they found her passed out and bleeding on the side of the road, and points over to the corner. He lets her know that the person standing over there is the one who actually rescued her. The horned woman tells Nomi to stay still because she's about to heal her. She starts the spell, telling the girl to just bear with the sensation for a second. As the light fades, Nomi realizes she used to put magic into stones while polishing them, but seeing it heal her wound like this is a total first. She's completely floored by the magic. The horned woman asks if this is actually her first time getting healed with magic. Nomi just sits there thinking about it, not really sure how to answer. Looking at her, the woman notices Nomi is only about 140 centimeters tall. She figures being clueless about magic makes sense if the kid is basically a dwarf. The ogre joins in and mentions how her face and hair look way different than a normal dwarf. Nomi looks up at him, wondering where he's going with this. Nomi finally admits she's a half-dwarf, and it hits her that even other races can tell she doesn't fit in. She looks down, feeling a bit awkward about her identity. The horned woman takes that in and then switches topics. She asks Nomi what she did for a living before she ended up out here. Nomi is caught off guard by the question. She stutters a bit, saying it's a pretty sudden thing to ask while she's still recovering. She explains that she used to do some mining back home, but then she mentions that she also worked as a crafter, and the horned woman stops her right there, asking her to repeat that last part. Nomi gets a little nervous and quietly says again that she was a crafter. The horned woman points right at Nomi and shouts that she's officially hired, which sends the kid into a total panic in the background. Nomi stammers and asks if she's really getting hired right on the spot. She looks completely dizzy and overwhelmed by the news. The ogre steps in and tells the woman to slow down. He says they shouldn't assume her situation, since she might just be lost. But Nomi just looks down and quietly admits she doesn't have any friends and is all alone, leaving the ogre standing there in awkward silence. That's all the horned woman needs to hear as she shouts again that she's hired, while the ogre tries to get her to chill out. The ogre argues that just hiring someone because of their past job without knowing their deal is crazy, but the horned woman crosses her arms and shuts him down. She says they really don't have time to be taking things lightly anymore. Looking stressed, she mentions how lantern graveyards are just going to keep multiplying, and they have to do something about it right now. Nomi catches that weird phrase and asks her if she really just said lantern graveyard, because she sits there wondering how a graveyard for lanterns even works, since lanterns aren't even living things in the first place. The horned woman leans in close, pointing out that Nomi looks totally lost, and Nomi can only offer a nervous nod in agreement. So the woman decides to break things down and explain the situation, which makes the little girl feel a bit relieved. She starts by talking about the current state of the demon kingdom, but the explanation gets weird when she mentions they just buy brand new lanterns whenever the magic stones inside them run out. Nomi just stands there stunned by the mention of a demon kingdom. It turns out this country is full of a magic-using race called Majin and sits right on a mountain packed with energy. They're actually the biggest buyers for anything the dwarves make, but Nomi is stuck on the lantern thing, asking if she heard right about them replacing the whole unit every time. She questions why they wouldn't just swap the magic stone instead, and the horned woman admits it's a fair point, except she then yells that nobody in the entire Demon Lord's castle actually knows how to do a simple repair like that. The horned woman holds her chest and admits they actually tried their best to handle it, but then she just groans in total frustration, explaining how the lanterns are designed so the bottom won't even open. And even if someone smashes the glass to get to the magic stone, it's a lost cause because the whole thing is ruined and will never light up again. Nomi just looks at her, totally confused, and asks if swapping out a magic stone is really supposed to be that difficult. And the ogre grabs her while the horned woman just lets out this high-pitched squeak because she's so stressed out. The woman leans in with a scary look, asking if the repair is some secret tech only dwarves know, which makes Nomi shake as she says no. She starts shaking the poor girl and screams about how the dwarf merchants used that as an excuse to jack up the prices, yelling that their entire national treasury is basically being drained dry by those greedy guys. Nomi starts crying and apologizes for how ruthless her people are being, saying she's truly sorry for the trouble they've caused. The horned woman finally calms down, stands up straight, and just says she gets the situation. The horned woman leans in with a sharp look, telling Nomi she needs to just go ahead and accept their offer. She explains they're going to set her up with a major position, making her the official chief craftsman for the entire demon kingdom. Moving on, the woman asks if there are any objections, but she directs the question straight to the demon lord, leaving Nomi totally floored, especially since Nomi can only stammer out a question asking if he's really the demon lord, while the man takes a heavy step toward her. The tall man reveals his true form with massive horns, standing there with this incredibly dark and serious energy. Nomi completely loses it, her mind racing through total nonsense as she feels like she's about to faint from the shock. She feels like she's being hunted by a predator and starts crying, convinced that she's going to be finished off right then and there. But then Nomi just goes blank for a second, realizing the sheer pressure of the situation was way more than she could actually handle. The demon lord stares her down with one intense eye and tells her she's officially hired, asking if she's got any issues with that. Nomi screams out a yes, because she's too scared to say anything else, though she's secretly wondering if her life is actually going to be okay. Medes realizes they haven't actually done introductions yet and tells Nomi she can just call her Medes, even though she's the prime minister of the whole nation, and then Sigrise jumps in, saying it's a pleasure to meet her while revealing he's actually the top-ranked member of the 4 heavenly kings. The two of them get all hyped up and announce that the man standing right there is the actual king of the entire country, revealing him as the demon lord Magicalia, who just stands there looking incredibly serious while the weight of his title settles in. Nomi starts to spiral because she's surrounded by the prime minister, a heavenly king, and the demon lord, feeling like she's being hit with a total barrage of crazy titles. She feels completely out of place and wonders if this is even okay, but she manages to introduce herself simply as Nomi, which makes the demon lord pause, realizing she doesn't even have a last name, so he decides to handle it right then and there. He tells her she's going to inherit the name of the former chief crafter, Razme D. Verger, giving her a real identity in this new world, and Nomi just stammers out a thank you, still completely overwhelmed by everything that's happening so fast. She looks away with a bit of a blush, trying to tell herself that getting a new name and a high-ranking job isn't a bad deal at all. Nomi's still processing the fact that she was totally lost before getting hired as a crafter, and on top of that, she can't believe they gave her such a high-class name. Medes decides it's time to get to work and tells her they need to go see what kind of shape the castle is in right now. Sigrise is all about it and says he's coming along too, while Nomi just tries to keep up and agrees to the plan. The demon lord wants to join in, but Medes shuts him down immediately by reminding him he's got a mountain of paperwork to do, which has him acting like she's being totally unfair. Watching them go back and forth makes Nomi realize she's definitely figured out who actually runs things around the castle. Just as they're about to move, one of the uniformed guards calls out to Nomi to grab her attention, leaving her wondering what's going on as the guard reaches out and hands her a folded piece of white cloth. She takes it and realizes it's her dwarf hat, the one thing she always used to hide her identity back home. The guard explains that they found it lying right next to her while she was passed out and just wanted to make sure it was hers, so Nomi tells him it is, but she's mostly just shocked that even with her hat off, nobody has said a single word about her hair. Sigrise sees Nomi looking weird and asks if she's still in pain, offering to go grab Medes for help, but Nomi quickly tells him that's not why she's acting like this. She looks down and explains that her dad was basically the only person who ever saw her without her hat on, which is why being bareheaded feels so strange. Sigrise thinks about it for a second and remembers hearing that dwarves usually keep their heads covered like that as a rule, so he looks at her and says there's no pressure to wear the thing if she doesn't actually need to anymore. Medes looks her right in the eye and tells her it's absolutely no problem at all if she wants to leave it off. They keep going and point out that her hair is actually pretty amazing and that it feels like a total waste to hide it away under a hat, a sentiment that even the demon lord chimes in to agree with. Hearing all this support makes Nomi's face turn bright red. As she tries to hold back her tears, Sigrise asks if she's doing okay, and Nomi promises she's fine. It's just that everyone being so nice to her is really hitting her hard. With everything settled, Medes looks ahead and officially introduces the girl by her new high-class title, Nomi Lasme Diverger. Nomi feels a wave of relief wash over her, thinking to herself that she might actually be glad she came to this place after all. As they walk through the castle, Medes explains that Nomi's main job will be looking after and fixing all the craftworks throughout the building, so she tells the girl that tracking the overall work progress is now her responsibility, which Nomi nervously accepts as they head deeper inside. Medes moves on to the best part and mentions the salary, telling her she'll be getting 2 gold coins every single week on the Day of the Eagle. The thought of that much money has Nomi's head spinning. She can't believe the pay is that high and asks if she's hearing right. Medes just adjusts her glasses and keeps it professional, saying that anyone doing real work deserves to be paid fairly for it. It's a huge shock for Nomi since back in her village, even working herself to the bone with her dad didn't earn them half that much. But as they keep walking through the quiet, dim hallways, she starts to notice something about the environment that seems a bit off. She looks over at Medes and points out that the castle seems really short on lanterns, which catches the Prime Minister totally off guard. Medes asks how she can even tell, and Nomi explains that even with her dwarf night vision, it's still way too dark in these corridors. Medes admits they've actually been getting a ton of complaints from all over the place about how dark it is, so she explains that the current distance between the lanterns is really the best they can do for now. The Prime Minister mentions they have a few other options but quickly brushes it off, just as a loud noise from the wall makes both of them jump. Medes completely loses her cool, shouting about her precious lantern getting damaged. She's clearly stressed about it, but Nomi stays calm and reaches into her gear, suggesting they just swap the broken one with the lantern she brought. She carefully sets her own lantern into the wall mount, making sure it's secure and ready to go. As the hallway brightens, Medes stares at the glow and notes that the light coming from it feels really different and mysterious. Nomi tells her it's powered by something called Dawnstone, explaining that even though it's not super bright, the light travels a really long distance, leaving Medes totally speechless. She can't believe a tool like this actually exists in the world. While Medes is still processing the shock, Nomi kneels down and says it's time to open things up and get to work. Nomi realizes she can't just let a high-ranking official like Lady Medes sit on the cold floor, so she calls out to the Prime Minister to grab her attention while she digs through her gear. She suddenly pulls out a huge floral-patterned cushion, surprising Medes, who can't believe she had that on her. Nomi happily invites her to take a seat, but Medes is way more interested in how that bag works, so Nomi just explains that it's super convenient because it holds a ton of stuff, leaving Medes pretty confused. Moving on, Nomi gets back to the task at hand and picks up the broken lantern to take a closer look. She starts rolling the top open to see what's inside, and as the casing pops apart, she notices a bunch of white powder falling out, which makes Medes ask what that stuff actually is. Nomi explains it's just magic stone dust, and that these stones get really brittle and start crumbling once they're out of energy. As she inspects the parts, Nomi realizes the whole lantern is just a sloppy job that definitely isn't good enough for a castle. Nomi explains that once the magic stone dust hits the board, it causes a bad connection, and Midi says she understands, so Nomi confidently tells the Prime Minister that this is actually an easy fix she can handle in no time. She gets to work brushing the dust off the base, wondering if the stone she's holding is still usable after a polish. Midis watches her work in silence, thinking to herself that Nomi's skills are actually pretty brilliant, which makes Nomi act all shy, telling her that the stuff she's doing really isn't anything special at all. Nomi explains she can reuse the stone if she repolishes it, adding that infusing it with magic keeps it from crumbling away. Midis is shocked that it shines like new, but Nomi just says it should stay like that for a while longer. Then she puts the stone back on the board and starts carefully reconnecting all the internal wires. The lantern suddenly flashes with a bright light, showing that everything is finally working again, and Nomi awkwardly says it's supposed to look like this, then offers to go fix the rest of the streetlights first. Midis stands there completely stunned, whispering Nomi's new name like she can't believe it, and then she gets right in Nomi's face, shouting about how it's actually incredible she fixed the problem so fast. Nomi starts tearing up, trying to play it down by saying she's still part dwarf so she should be able to do this much. Midis mentions that dwarves actually caused their treasury crisis in the first place, which surprises Nomi, but Midis follows up by saying Nomi has the kind of talent that regular people just don't have. Nomi just stares as Midis tells her she needs to stop being so modest and just accept the compliment. Midis gives her a genuine smile and thanks her for the help, and it makes Nomi think back to the village where everyone just treated her like a total weirdo. They always called her a nuisance, and her dad was the only one who ever had anything nice to say to her. Nomi looks down, thinking about how she's still pretty nervous and lacks confidence, but things are starting to change. Nomi gets really emotional and shouts about how much she wants to be useful. She's just so happy she could actually help out for once, and Midis tells her that's exactly what she likes to hear. She says it's time to head over to their main destination, so they start walking. Nomi thinks to herself that the repair work itself shouldn't be a big deal at all, and she starts feeling a bit of hope, thinking maybe she actually has what it takes to survive living in the Demon Lord's castle after all. They eventually stop in front of a massive door, and Midis lets her know they've finally arrived. Midis swings the door open and tells Nomi that this is the specific place she was talking about. Nomi peers inside, but the whole room is totally dark. She can't help but notice it's basically pitch black in there. As she looks at the rows and rows of old lamps on the shelves, Nomi nervously asks if this is some kind of lantern graveyard. Midis stands by her side and addresses her by her full inherited name, Nomi Lasme Diverger. She gives her a serious look and tells Nomi that her job is to get every single one of these lanterns back in working order. Nomi's face goes totally pale as she starts wondering if the Demon Lord's castle is actually just a giant sweatshop, and she starts freaking out because the amount of work is way more than she ever bargained for, making her look at the endless rows of broken lanterns and wonder if this is actually what's happening. It's like she's already picturing herself being locked in this dark room forever, just slaving away at a desk and getting stuck in a shift that never ends while she tries to fix every single one of these things by herself. So she starts grabbing her head and losing it, questioning if this place is really as evil as the stories say. Midis just stands there watching the meltdown and calmly asks if there's something wrong. But then she gets a serious look and says Nomi's full name to get her attention back. Nomi tries to laugh it off and says it's just a lot of stuff, admitting she's already counting how many all-nighters she'll need, which leaves Midis looking completely confused, asking Nomi exactly what she means by that. Midis explains that showing Nomi how things actually look around the castle was the main goal, but seeing how stressed out the kid looks, Midis leans in and says sorry for putting so much pressure on her so fast. Nomi starts waving her hands around like crazy, telling her that's not the problem at all. She laughs it off, admitting she just can't shake that old corporate slave mindset and finds it pretty embarrassing, so she starts bowing and apologizing for the big misunderstanding while Midis just watches and says she gets it. Midis decides it's time to head back and mentions that Sigrise is going to show up soon to finish the tour before leaving. She tells Nomi to feel free to pick up and look at anything she wants in the room. Nomi gets all hyped up and shouts her thanks to Lord Midis as the woman starts walking away. But then Midis stops for a second, giving a little smile and telling Nomi that she's really counting on her. She looks back one last time and addresses her by her official title, Chief Crafting Officer. Nomi watches Midis walk away and shouts that she's going to do her absolute best, taking a deep breath once she's alone. She admits to herself that this job is actually a massive responsibility, but it makes her really happy that Midis trusts her enough to leave the work in her hands, and she pumps her fist in the air, getting herself hyped up to finally get started on the task. The kid looks up at the massive shelves and realizes the sheer amount of work waiting for her is pretty crazy. Staring at the piles, she wonders if these things would have just kept multiplying forever if she hadn't come along. She figures she can sort through everything by condition later, But for now, she picks one up and decides it'll do. As she examines the lantern, she starts thinking back to the specific things Medes told her about how they work. She remembers that the bottom wouldn't open, so she had to break the glass just to get the old magic stone out. Even after putting a fresh stone inside, the lantern wouldn't light up, and she wonders if that's exactly what happened. Nomi stares at the lantern with her hand on her chin. Wondering what's actually going on, she decides to start by checking out the bottom cover first to see if she can find any clues. As she opens it up, her eyes go wide and she asks herself what she's even looking at. But before she can figure it out, Sigrise slams the door open and apologizes for making her wait. Nomi jumps a little and turns around, surprised to see Sigrise showing up out of nowhere. They start walking through the halls together while Sigrise asks if she liked that lantern graveyard. Nomi admits that the whole place was way more intense than she ever expected it to be. Sigrise starts acting a bit nostalgic, mentioning how things were back when the old man was still around. Apparently, the guy used to handle all the repairs himself while complaining the entire time. Nomi looks around and says it's a total waste for such a cool castle to be this dark inside. Sigrise looks down at Nomi and mentions he heard dwarves were actually the ones who helped build the castle. He keeps walking, saying dwarves are the real masters of crafting and it's something his people could never do. Nomi looks away and agrees with him quietly. Though she sounds like she's doubting herself, Sigrise catches on immediately and asks her what's up, wondering if she's just lacking confidence right now. She looks down, admitting that while she definitely likes crafting, she isn't sure about her own skill because thinking back to how the village chief and the others treated her makes the whole thing feel really complicated. Sigrise just laughs it off and tells her that as long as she enjoys what she's doing, everything is totally fine. Nomi is pretty shocked by his sudden energy as he yells that her skills will definitely catch up if she just keeps at it. He explains he only got to be the top ranked of the 4 heavenly kings because he loved weapons so much he never stopped. Nomi just stands there looking at him, not entirely sure if his logic actually makes sense. Sigrise lets out a massive laugh, looking totally relaxed while Nomi just giggles and starts feeling a bit more comfortable. She watches him and thinks he really acts just like a fun uncle at a family party. The serious mood gets totally killed when Nomi's stomach growls loud enough for everyone to hear, making her turn bright red. Sigrise just laughs even harder and jokes that her stomach has a pretty solid beat before apologizing for being a bad host. He tells her he'll show her the room later since she's clearly starving. They head into a busy dining hall where other demons eat. Sigrise leads her through the room, telling her the first priority is getting some actual food in their systems. He points to a huge spread and tells her to go nuts and eat whatever she wants, which makes Nomi's eyes light up. She's completely blown away by all the fancy skewers and dishes laid out everywhere. She wonders if the meat is chicken, staring at how the sauce is literally glistening under the lights. Nomi stares at the skewers, recognizing the bell peppers and eggplant tearing up because she can't believe she's finally eating a real meal. She thanks Sigrise as he tells her it's time to dig in, so she goes for it, taking a huge bite of the meat. She loves the sweet and salty teriyaki sauce, thinking the burnt bits make it taste just like yakitori. She tells Sigrise it's incredible, and he lets her know it's local chicken from Kitayama village. Nomi finds the veggies just as fresh, especially the eggplant which has been her favorite since her past life. To wash it down, she tries the wild grape water, loving how the honey makes it perfectly refreshing. Nomi finishes her drink and lets out a long sigh of relief, looking totally satisfied with the meal, but then she starts acting a little weird. Sigrise notices her glancing away and asks what's wrong, seeing as she keeps staring at the drinks. He asks if she's looking at the wine and Nomi just giggles. Sigrise remembers her grandpa liked to drink, but he worries if a kid like her can handle it. Nomi gets pretty offended and yells that she's an adult. She says for a dwarf alcohol is like water. She brags about being able to drink a ton, so Sigrise tells her they have work to do and should wait until next time. As they walk, he says sorry for dragging her around when she's tired. Nomi insists she's totally fine, looking like she's got all her energy back, bragging about how dwarves pride themselves on stamina, while also mentioning how great the food was. Sigrise laughs and says he's glad she liked it, since it makes treating her worth the effort. He starts talking about where she's going to sleep, explaining that the second floor of the castle acts as the dorms. He mentions he lives down in the town himself, but people from out of the area stay here. Nomi notices how dark the hallways are, while Sigrise jokes that even though it's called a dorm, it's basically a dungeon. He stops at a door and tells her that she's finally made it to her new room. As soon as the door opens, Nomi freezes up, her eyes wide with total disbelief. She can't help but yell out in shock, seeing that the place looks exactly like a traditional dwarf home. The sight makes her glow with happiness, as she says the room feels just like home. Sigrise finally gets what's going on, realizing the room was actually built by the old man, So Nomi asks if he means the legendary former head of crafting, and he tells her that's the one. He explains how the dwarves hated the high ceilings because they couldn't relax, so they lowered them, packing the space with dirt and even smashing through the stone walls to dig out more rooms. Sigrise just shakes his head, wondering why anyone would ever go to that much trouble for a dorm, but Nomi's eyes light up as she shouts about how much she loves digging and how hyped she is. He just stands there thinking dwarves have some pretty weird taste while Nomi keeps exploring, until she stops at a desk, mentioning how crazy it is that the whole place is still so clean. She runs her hand across the wood, noticing there isn't a single speck of dust even after all this time, and after picking up some old gear, she decides they can start using these tools right away. Sigrise looks around the spotless room and figures Medes must have sent cleaners in here on the regular, telling Nomi the place was kept ready for the craftsmen who would eventually show up, which catches her off guard. She looks down at the old tools in her hands and quietly takes it all in, realizing just how much work is ahead of her, especially since that lantern graveyard was way worse than she expected. It makes sense why the room was packed, considering every broken lantern from the big castle ended up there, but she thinks about Medes and the others counting on her, making her even more desperate to be useful. Nomi gets a serious look in her eyes as a specific thought hits her, and she says out loud how sad it is that everyone just treats these lanterns like they're disposable garbage. She thinks about the demons looking for light and the craftsmen who put in the work to make them shine, remembering how her dad used to tell her never to view his creations as something that could just be thrown away. Nomi thinks about how these lanterns were meant to shine as bright as possible and built to last through years of use. She smiles while holding one, realizing the original makers put so much love into their work, and blushing to herself, she finally admits that her heart is really in this because she just loves making things. A look of total determination hits her eyes. She's fully convinced now that she can actually do this. She yells out to the morning sky, looking for a bit of backup for her newfound confidence, when Sigrise stretches and notices the sun is up, mentioning it's finally time for them to head to bed. He waves goodbye with a laugh, telling her he'll be back in the evening and to make sure she rests up, leaving Nomi waving back, surprised to find out that demons stay up all night just like dwarves do. As soon as he's gone, the wall hits her and she stretches out, feeling completely drained from the long night. She really wants to grab a bath before she totally passes out, but she's barely hanging on at this point. Nomi walks into the room and stops in her tracks. She's totally shocked by what she finds inside. She leans over the counter with a little laugh, thinking to herself about how the place feels just like home. Blushing as she feels the water, she realizes they even left out fire and water magic stones for her to use. It turns out this whole world runs on these magic stones. They're like the main power source that makes everything so easy. She peeks over the edge of the tub with a huge smile, just feeling so glad that she can finally relax. And as she looks around the room again, she can't help but say out loud how much it reminds her of being back home. She touches the water again and finds it's perfectly warm, noticing the stones they left behind for her once more, which is great since these infused stones are what keep all the basic stuff in the world running so smoothly. Nomi looks over the side of the bath, feeling like a huge weight is off her shoulders, saying it's a total relief, before she finally sinks into the hot water, thinking about how long it's been since her last bath and how this is a literal lifesaver. Nomi thinks about how she only had a wet cloth in the carriage, but being in a real tub is just way better, making her realize that a good soak really does wash the soul, especially since it's been so long, making this whole bath feel like a total lifesaver. She remembers wiping herself down on the road, but honestly nothing beats a real soak like this, as she continues washing up, thinking they definitely say a bath cleanses the soul for a reason. After she gets out, she wraps her head in a towel and sighs about how close that all was, knowing it would be a huge mess if she caught a cold and caused trouble for everyone right now. She reaches for a machine on the counter, which turns out to be a warm air dryer, since dwarf homes underground are always damp and laundry takes forever, meaning everyone needs a blower to keep the air moving. Nomi actually modified this one to blow hot air, so it dries her hair fast and keeps her from getting a chill. Nomi remembers how girls back home used to laugh at her inventions and ask what the point even was, but now she feels great, telling herself she's finally being useful, while she laughs about how convenient her modified dryer turned out to be. She tucks herself into bed and says it's time to sleep since tomorrow is a big day, except the next morning she's already up and working, singing a silly song about magic stones being gnome droppings, when a huge shadow falls over her and the tall man calls out to the tiny girl. Nomi is still mid-song when the demon lord stands right behind her and calls her by her new title, making her jump out of her skin and apologize for the weird singing, but he says it's fine. He looks over her workspace and asks if she's really already started working, and as she nervously confirms it, he admits he didn't expect her to be this fast. Nomi looks down, looking pretty embarrassed as she apologizes for getting ahead of herself, but the demon lord tells her she doesn't need to apologize at all. He says he'd never get mad at someone for working hard and being honest, so Medes steps in and asks what the deal is with the current situation. Nomi turns to the Prime Minister, calling her Lady Medes, while she hands over a paper, saying she already put together a full estimate for the repairs. The demon lord takes a look and just says he sees as Nomi starts breaking down the numbers. She explains that about 70% of the work is just simple fixes, though they'll need some new magic stones for the rest. But then she adds that she has a few ideas she wants to test out, so the total cost probably won't even be that high. Nomi stops talking and looks at the two of them, asking if they're both okay because they're both staring at her report in total shock. Medes can't even believe it, asking if their new chief craftsman is actually some kind of genius. While she realizes how much money this is going to save them, even joking to herself about getting a better late-night snack. The demon lord thinks the whole thing is just fancy, and Medes decides that since Nomi is clearly the real deal, it's probably safe to hand over the next item. Medes hands over a ring of keys, explaining that these give access to the equipment and materials rooms, and then she pulls out one more for the workshop across the hall, telling Nomi she's officially in charge of managing everything. Nomi notices a tiny key on the ring and asks what that one is for, so Medes explains it's for the precious metals storage inside the workshop, mentioning that since they're demons, they don't really have any use for that stuff anyway. Nomi takes the responsibility head-on, shouting that she's got it and they can leave everything to her as they walk through the hall. Later on, Nomi is alone in her room, leaning on the table and thinking back to Medes mentioning a late-night snack. She starts daydreaming about food, thinking about how sweet stuff is great, but having something salty would be pretty nice too. She's totally lost in her thoughts when she suddenly hears something and looks over. She starts to ask who's there, but then she catches a glimpse of someone and gets completely terrified, her eyes going wide as she starts to lose it. But it's just a horned demon guy in a suit who immediately drops into a deep bow, frantically telling her how incredibly sorry he is. Nomi tries to play it cool, telling the guy it's fine and that she was just a little surprised. The guy looks really worried, apologizing over and over for scaring her and asking for her forgiveness. He keeps going, insisting he's not some suspicious person. He's just really nervous about meeting her, so he introduces himself as Setsubi, the guy who handles all the lantern maintenance around the castle. Nomi brightens up immediately, asking if he's actually the lantern keeper she heard about. Setsubi laughs and rubs his head, admitting he heard a new chief crafting officer got hired, and he just couldn't wait to meet her, which catches Nomi off guard, making her wonder if people in the castle are really gossiping about her already. She moves past the shock and mentions the lanterns, saying she doesn't have a ton of them yet, but she starts digging through her stuff, telling him she's already found a few that just need some quick repairs. Setsubi just stares at her in total disbelief, shocked that she's already prepared to get to work. Nomi gives a big yes, and tells him she already double-checked all the lanterns on the desk to make sure they're working fine. She points out there's even more on the shelf, telling him she'll go ahead and move those over to the desk too. Setsubi can barely believe his eyes, asking if all these lanterns are actually meant for him to use. So he takes a closer look and realizes they aren't just new, they're higher quality than anything he's ever seen before. Nomi notices he's getting really emotional and calls out his name, wondering what's going on when Setsubi just starts bawling right there, which has Nomi totally confused about why he's crying this hard. He manages to explain through the tears that the castle has been struggling with a massive lantern shortage for a long time. Apparently, the hallways were so dark it was getting dangerous, and the dining hall was so dim that people were losing their appetites. It got so bad the staff had to feel around in the dark just to find keyholes, which makes Nomi realize how miserable things were. Setsubi wipes his eyes and admits they really did try to fix things on their own, but nothing they did seemed to help much. Setsubi explains that they really did try their best with the tools they had, but they couldn't even make a dent in the lantern problem. Nomi listens to him and starts putting the pieces together, wondering if there's a specific reason everything is so busted. She thinks back to that first lantern she found in the equipment room when she arrived and remembers how the screw holes were stripped so bad it was actually shocking to see. It hits her that the guy was probably just trying to force everything together with brute strength. She figures she better try to fix it. Looking at him, she can't help but wonder if this demon guy is just naturally clumsy, and he keeps going, telling her about how he's been handling things on his own up until now. He admits he used to spend his time digging through the lantern graveyard, hoping for a miracle even though he knew it was a waste of time. To him, seeing all these beautiful, working lanterns in front of him feels like a total dream, and Nomi sees him getting worked up again, so she calls out his name to try and calm him down. Nomi looks right at Setsubi and tells him that for now, he should just bring her whatever they've already got ready. She's talking about every single broken lantern in the entire Demon King's castle, looking more serious than ever. She makes a huge promise right then and there, telling him she's going to fix every last one of them. Setsubi is clearly moved by this, his eyes welling up as he tells her he's sure that because of her, they won't ever have to worry about living in the darkness anymore, which actually catches Nomi a little off guard. He keeps going, giving her a huge thanks, and officially calling her the chief artisan for the first time. Setsubi gives her a deep, respectful bow before pulling his cart of equipment away, while Nomi just smiles and waves. But the second he's gone, she gets fired up and says there's absolutely no time to waste, rolling up her sleeves and heading straight for the pile of work, determined to get everything fixed up as fast as she possibly can. She claps her hands together to focus, deciding the best way to start is by sorting everything out based on how busted they are. Nomi gets right to it, deciding the first move is to split the whole pile into high-quality and low-quality lanterns. She figures the best thing to do with the low-quality ones is to just take them apart completely, so she starts stripping them down to save the brass from the main bodies to use for later repairs. She carefully stacks the glass panes and sets aside the circuit boards, since they're made of valuable mithril. When it comes to the high-quality lanterns, she starts sorting them one by one based on how much work they need. After a while, she manages to clear out a whole shelf, but looking around, she sees a ton of work left. She realizes that if she hadn't shown up, this lantern graveyard would have just kept growing forever. But she keeps a positive attitude, reminding herself of the code that every capable half-dwarf follows, which is that work is 80% prep and only 20% doing, and getting ready is the most important part. Even though she knows preparation is key, she admits that just sorting stuff all day is starting to wear her out. Nomi looks over the scraps, thinking about melting down all that brass she stripped once she gets a chance. But then a voice cuts in from above, saying the workday is finally over and it's time to head out. Sigrise shows up with a wave, telling her she did a great job today and should be proud of herself. He asks what she's planning to eat, and she starts thinking about something light and easy to handle, but then she changes her mind and tells him she isn't actually going to go out for food. She explains that she's pretty wiped out and wants to just stay in her room to finish unpacking, which Sigrise totally gets, reminding her that she's still brand new to the place and needs some time to adjust. Suddenly he gets all fired up, announcing that as the older guy here, he's going to buy her breakfast, and he gives her a massive slap on the back, telling her she has to eat and sleep well if she wants to grow. Nomi is basically dying from the hit, but she still tries to be polite and thanks him for the offer. Nomi looks off to the side, telling herself that since she's a half-dwarf, she won't ever grow any taller, and then she sits down to some food, popping the cork on a bottle of wine while she gets settled. She says it's time to get to work and starts pouring herself a drink into a small metal cup. While taking a sip, she remembers how they used these same cups for mead back in the village, but it turns out this stuff is actually pretty easy to drink, and she starts feeling a bit of a buzz, which gets her thinking that she should probably just make some actual wine glasses for herself. Leaning on her hand, she plans out how to use her metalworking to get the shape right. But then she realizes she should just design it however she wants and starts sketching on some paper. She thinks about adding fancy chains or even some rare gems to the design to make it look cool, aiming for something like the Holy Grail she remembers seeing in paintings during her past life. Nomi starts getting really into her sketches, picturing a brass base with amethyst and maybe adding a ruby with obsidian or even some lazulite to look like a starry sky. She can't help but smile to herself, saying out loud how fun this all is, just taking all these ideas in her head and turning them into art. Thinking about how to give them shape and actually bring them to life makes her reflect on her past life, where she always wanted to create more things she actually loved. Back then, her soul felt pretty dead because she was constantly overworked and exhausted, but whenever she saw something beautiful, her heart would still start racing, even though she'd basically given up on the idea of ever making her own designs real. So it was definitely a huge surprise for her to wake up and realize she'd been reincarnated. Nomi thinks about how being an artisan in this world feels just like being a jeweler in her old life, so it was easy to settle in, especially with the master crafter dwarf blood running through her veins. This new world is a place filled with magic and mana stones, and it makes her feel like she can actually achieve something big here. Looking at the possibilities, she realizes she can do things now that were completely impossible before, which gets her so hyped. She says in this life, she's going to craft whatever she wants to her heart's content. She looks at her own two hands and promises to make it happen, knowing that as long as she's got them, she can keep creating things forever. Later on, she's hanging out and pouring a drink, thinking about how healthy this workplace is compared to her old one, and she's just glad she finally has some real quality time to spend on her hobbies too. Nomi thinks about how great it is to be working at the Demon King's castle, feeling like the job is super rewarding. But more than anything else, there's one part that she really loves. She can't help but laugh at how carefree all these demons are, almost calling them clumsy before catching herself. Looking at a lantern, she realizes that now that she's really thinking about it, she could probably build the thing herself and run it for way less money. She starts looking into the circuit board structure to see how it's made. Later, she's walking through the halls trying to decide on dinner meat is alright, but she's really craving grilled cheese. Sigrise suddenly shows up behind her and suggests she get something to go with some wine. Nomi totally loses it and asks if he heard her talking to herself, but he just laughs and says it's good she's hungry. As Nomi and Sigrise walk into the dining hall, the chef spots them immediately. He looks pretty hyped and yells out for Master Sigrise as they approach the counter. The chef starts bragging about the daily special, telling them it's some fancy roast black magic beef from Mount Noko, which is basically Nomi's dream come true. She looks totally obsessed, with her eyes literally sparkling just at the thought of eating that roast beef. Sigrise doesn't even hesitate, telling the guy he'll take 2 plates of the special and a bottle of wine to go with it. But Nomi starts getting a little fidgety. She tries to speak up and get his attention, looking a bit unsure about something as she tells him she really ought to pay this time since she just got a gift recently. Sigrise just lets out a big laugh and tells her it's fine, then he leans in real close like he's about to drop some classified info. He tells her he's going to let her in on a little secret. Turns out he's actually rich, because he gets a massive allowance for being one of the Elite Four. Nomi's eyes go wide and she is completely blown away by the sound of that. She starts thinking that an Elite Four allowance sounds like the ultimate high-paying gig. Right then, the chef comes back with their order and tells them sorry for the wait as he sets the food down. The chef serves up the main event, a plate of Nakama black magic cow roast beef that looks so good Nomi can't help but lose it and stare at the dish like it's a work of art. She's totally obsessed, counting out 5 huge slices of meat and thinking about how tender it must be. As she starts to eat, her knife just slides right through the beef with no effort at all. It's so thick and perfect that her heart starts racing before she even takes a bite. She picks up a piece, and it basically melts the second it hits her tongue. She's in total heaven, completely overwhelmed by the flavor as she yells over to Sigrise about how insane the meat is. He's right there with her, digging into his own plate and agreeing that it's easily the best thing he's had. Nomi keeps eating, thinking that even pairing it with a crunchy baguette makes it so good her cheeks might actually fall off. She moves on to the sides, getting hyped over how rich and creamy the mashed potatoes are while Sigrise decides they need to do this right. He says since they're already enjoying the meal, they might as well have some wine to go with it, so Nomi takes a sip and lets out a satisfied breath, finally relaxing into the best meal of her life. Nomi takes a sip, and her face turns bright red as she realizes the wine is actually sweet, which hits her with this fruity aroma that smells amazing. She starts thinking about how the wine and the fat from the beef are mixing perfectly, and she's losing it because the combination has basically created a whole new sauce right in her mouth. She calls it a perpetual motion machine of food and wine, shouting about how much she loves being on the 4 Heavenly Kings budget while they both keep digging into the meal. After a bit, Sigrise stops and says something just came to mind, looking over at Nomi to tell her that the whole castle is finally starting to look a lot brighter because of her. Nomi smiles while she eats, mentioning how it seems like Setsubi has been busy replacing everything she managed to fix up. But Sigrise just nods and tells her that none of it would have happened without all the hard work she's been doing. He suddenly realizes he almost forgot to tell her something really important, leaving Nomi looking pretty confused until Sigrise gets a serious look on his face and says that tomorrow is finally the big day they've all been waiting for. Nomi looks pretty surprised, repeating what Sigrise just said and asking if he's really been waiting for this. Sigrise holds up a finger with a big grin, telling her that tomorrow is finally Eagle Day. He leans in with a serious look and says it's their weekly payday, which makes Nomi's face turn red as she realizes he's totally right. She starts cheering, shouting about how it's finally Eagle Day and she's about to get paid. Sigrise tells her to hurry up and grab her pay during work hours before the vault closes on her. So Nomi keeps those words from Lord Sigrise in her head while she heads out, feeling completely hyped and skipping down the hall because she's getting 2 whole gold coins. Setsubi walks along with her, wondering out loud what kind of food they should pick up on the way home tonight. They make it to the office where the clerk calls for the next person, and Nomi steps right up to the counter. Nomi stands at the counter and introduces herself as Normi Lasma Dwerger. Trying to stay professional even though, the pay clerk just smiles and calls her the chief crafting officer while confirming her ID and grabbing a bag. But when the clerk says here you are and drops the bag, it hits the counter with a heavy thud that leaves Nomi staring at it in shock, questioning what it is since it's way too heavy to be just 2 gold coins. She starts thinking maybe they mixed in a bunch of silver by mistake. So she takes a nervous peek inside, only to find the bag is packed with gold, making her clutch it tight and wonder why the amount is so huge. She goes running off to find the demon lord, yelling for him because her pay is obviously way too high. But she suddenly stops in the middle of the hall, staring at a total stranger in complete confusion. The guy looks down and notices her, and Nomi just stands there looking surprised as this sparkly demon guy mentions she's the small creature from the rumors and asks her why she's in such a rush. Nomi looks completely caught off guard by this new guy, especially when he's identified as Latu. But the demon lord steps in and tells Latu to quit scaring the poor girl so much. Latu just laughs and rubs the back of his head, saying it's his bad for the sudden approach. He leans in with a big, sparkly smile and says his name is Latu, telling her it's a pleasure to meet her. Nomi just blushes and stutters his name back, totally overwhelmed by how much energy he has. She tries to focus and remembers that she was actually looking for meaties before all this happened, while Latu thinks to himself that Nomi is definitely a different kind of person than he's used to. The demon lord comments that he's never heard anyone complain about getting paid too much, then asks for meaties, so Latu gives a quick salute and heads off to find her while Nomi watches him go. Meaties finally shows up and asks Nomi what the problem is, making Nomi freak out internally just because she used her name. Meaties explains that using the name Normie is just a temporary thing until she learns everyone's names, but the demon lord jumps in, telling Meaties that the kid actually came by because she thought her pay was a mistake. Nomi starts waving her hands around and tripping over her words, trying to say she just wanted to double-check the numbers. So Meaties gets straight to work, calling out for a report from the first floor northwest area. A crow suddenly freaks out, realizing it was actually being watched the whole time it was working, and Meaties commands the bird to tell her every single thing about how Nomi has been performing on the job. She starts breaking down the pay for organizing shelves and maintaining the lanterns, which adds up to over a gold coin. Then she adds in the pay for taking apart all those defective lanterns, which brings the total way up. Nomi stands there in shock as Meaties explains the total is over 10 gold, including a special bonus for her rank, which leaves Nomi's eyes watering once she realizes she's actually getting paid extra just for her new title. Nomi is totally losing it, realizing she's actually become a high-income earner, while Meaties just looks on casually mentioning that they haven't even added the fee for organizing the shelves to the total yet. Nomi starts panicking and waving her hands around, shouting that the original amount was actually totally fine. So Meaties turns back to the demon lord and apologizes for bothering him while he's clearly busy with work. Sigrise just laughs at the whole situation, calling Nomi a really interesting little creature, which leads to Nomi heading out, thinking about how she tried to say the pay was too much and he almost gave her even more. She feels the weight of that high evaluation and gets even more motivated to work her hardest walking down the hall, and noting that her timing is perfect since everyone just finished their late-night snacks. Sigrise pops up again and asks the guard if the small creature is on her way to the office as well, but Nomi gets annoyed and snaps that she has a name, and she's only there to confirm a few reports. Sigrise mentions they're headed to a meeting about the expedition and asks if she wants to join, which Nomi happily agrees to walking along with them, while realizing she has never actually seen the demon lord or Meaties in the cafeteria before. Sigrise admits he hasn't seen them around much lately, and Latu adds that they always turn him down even when he invites them, reaching the office as Latu calls out to announce their arrival to everyone inside. Meaties looks up from a massive pile of paperwork at her desk and asks why everyone showed up at the same time, telling Nomi she did a good job today, but mentions they have something important they need to talk about. Nomi looks a bit worried and interrupts, saying she needs to ask the demon lord something before they start. She asks if he's really just eating that piece of jerky as a late-night snack, but the demon lord just says he's aware, explaining that dried meat is the best because he can work while eating it, and chewing it makes him feel full. Nomi just stares at him, thinking his brain is being tricked into feeling full without getting any actual nutrition. Nomi asks Lady Meaties what she's holding. Since the smell and the look of it remind her of something, Meaties asks if they didn't have this in the Dwarf Kingdom, explaining that it's just a magic medicine called a stamina potion, looking pretty unhinged as she brags about her special brew having 5 times the usual thunder grass root so you can work forever. Nomi completely loses it and tells her that sounds like nothing but a dangerous drug, especially since masking your fatigue like that just leads to a total collapse, which is exactly what happened to Nomi in her past life. She admits she doesn't know if demons are different, but she still can't just stand there and watch him overwork himself, getting right in his face and telling him he needs to eat a real meal and take a break for once. The demon lord looks totally drained and just says he still has more work to do, but Nomi gets super serious and tells him lack of sleep is the enemy. It slows your brain down and makes you mess up. Plus, she points out that not sleeping enough is going to show up on his skin right away. The demon lord realizes his brain isn't even working right anymore, while Medes starts panicking about the state of her skin, which gives Nomi the perfect chance to yell that sleep is the most important thing right now, leaving the two demons sitting there in total silence. Medes finally sets her drink down and thanks Nomi for the advice, realizing she was way out of line. She asks Nomi if there was something she actually needed, suddenly remembering they were supposed to be talking shop. Nomi looks up and explains that she wanted to talk about the plan for the lanterns, saying she wants to keep the original look on the outside, but completely replace the insides with a magic circuit board. Medes has never heard of anything like that before and asks if it's some kind of secret dwarf technique, but Nomi tells her it's just her own design, explaining that it'll let them use basic non-elemental stones instead of the expensive light one. Medes is completely stunned by the idea since that would cut their costs down by a huge amount, so she gets real close and tells Nomi she needs to hear everything. Nomi shows off her newest invention, explaining that it's a day-night lantern built with magic craftsmanship, and a circuit board. Sigrai stares at the thing, repeating the name under his breath like he can't quite wrap his head around it. Latu picks up the lantern and says it looks normal at first, but then he notices a weird switch for light and dark. The room suddenly goes pitch black and everyone starts losing it, yelling for someone to stay calm. As they stand there in total darkness, Nomi panics and tells Latu to just flip the switch back the other way to fix everything. Once the lights are back on, the guys just stand there looking completely drained from the shock. Sigrais actually loves it though, telling Nomi it's amazing because he could finally get some sleep while out on expeditions. The demon lord looks pretty chill too, mentioning how that darkness was actually really calming for him, but Medes gets serious and asks Nomi if the lantern really runs on just a basic non-attribute magic stone. Nomi looks her straight in the eye and proudly confirms that it definitely does. Nomi starts breaking down exactly how her new day-night lantern works compared to the ones everyone is used to. She explains that a regular lantern is pretty wasteful because it just burns through the mana and light properties of expensive stones. Her version is way different though. She uses a magic circuit board with a special imitation crest engraved right on it. This setup lets her basically copy the properties of light, meaning she can use cheap substitute stones instead of the rare ones. And because the stones are just being copied rather than drained, the whole thing lasts almost forever. The light flows smoothly from the basic magic stone like it's nothing. Nomi adds that the darkness mode works the same way by copying dark ore, and switching between the two is a breeze. Medes processes this and asks if she's really just using a cheap stone as a power source to mimic a high-end one. Nomi gets all excited and tells her that's exactly how she pulled it off. Sigrais and the guys look totally overwhelmed by the technical talk, but he mutters that it would be a massive problem if she hadn't made it so efficient. Setsubi speaks up and asks if everyone is cool with him doing a live demo of the assembly while he walks them through it, and Medes thinks that's an awesome idea, mentioning how lucky she feels to see the chief crafting officer's skills in person. Nomi gets a little flustered and says it's actually kind of embarrassing to be watched like that, but she grabs the desk anyway. She gets her workspace all set up and tells the group she's ready to finally get the show on the road. As she prepares, she thinks back to the stuff her mom left her, specifically that shoulder bag and a grimoire all about magic crests. The bag looks pretty basic from the outside, but it's actually a magic item that holds a ton of stuff without ever looking bulky. She used to just think it was a handy tool, but then she notices something tucked away inside and reaches in, finding a single feather sitting right next to a piece of fabric with a magic crest embroidered on it. Nomi picks up a page and looks at the star-shaped marking, wondering if she's looking at some kind of copy. She holds the feather up, completely confused about why anyone would ever need to make a copy of a bird feather. Nomi looks closely at the feather, figuring its special traits were copied to make that bag with the huge capacity. It's basically a cool trick that lets her put special powers into regular items, and she's totally sure that combining all this is going to turn into something really impressive. She checks her notes on magical embroidery while focusing her eyes on the task at hand. She announces to the group that she's about to start carving the magic crests right onto the mithril plate. Setsubi watches closely, repeating the words magic crests, while the demon lord stands by silently, leaving Nomi at her desk thinking about the ledger and the embroidery skills her mom passed down to her. She focuses on the skill she's built up over time, carefully carving those crests while pumping mana into them, thinking back to her dad, and how everything she's ever made has led up to this moment, plus all the new ideas she's getting for different combinations while Setsubi looks on, totally amazed. Nomi decides to give her new invention a name. She's calling it Magitech, and Medes is totally mesmerized by the beautiful mana, saying it's exactly what she expected from the castle's chief artisan. Nomi shows off the finished magic circuit board, super hyped that the mimicry crest engraving is finally done. She says the next step is to put the whole thing together into the Akatsuki stone lantern, explaining that the base of the light comes from Dawnstone, which is way cheaper and easier to find than other stones. She points out that using mana as a power source makes the light spread even further, making Medes think back to the old lanterns that were in the hallways when she first showed up at the castle. Nomi confirms that's the idea. This is basically a much better version built for mass production. She brings out the non-elemental stones, saying they're perfect since they just need to supply mana. Nomi hands the finished lantern over to the Demon Lord, who takes a good look at her work. The Demon Lord stares at the lantern Nomi made, thinking about how the light feels incredibly warm, and Nomi chimes in to explain the tech, saying it copies specific properties so it won't even cast a shadow. Medes is completely blown away by the flawless masterpiece, noting how it lights up everything without leaving any blind spots. She adjusts her glasses and says it feels like the kingdom was gifted some scary talent from the dark gods, while Sigrise keeps it simple. He doesn't get the math, but he knows the little lady is straight up amazing. The Demon Lord looks on, thinking about how Nomi is small, cute, and a total genius treasure for the whole nation, so he jokes about locking her in a treasure chest, making Sigrise laugh about how useful a dwarf mimic is going to be. Medes starts crunching numbers, realizing the materials will be expensive at first but totally worth it for the future. She turns to the Demon Lord and tells him they absolutely have to name this invention a national treasure, but even as the Lord agrees it needs heavy guarding, Nomi just loses it and tells them it's a tool meant to be used. Nomi looks at her work and thinks about the next steps. They just need to mass-produce the circuits and swap them all out while she reflects on how things started. She admits to herself she was actually pretty worried about how this would go at first, but seeing everyone's faces lit up by her invention changes everything. Setsubi and Sigrise look over the lantern as Nomi watches them, realizing she finally hit her first big goal. She feels a huge weight off her shoulders knowing she's actually being useful now, and there's just no better feeling than seeing people this happy with something she made herself. She stands there with a gentle smile, thinking about how she never knew it could feel this good to help out. She's just soaking in the moment when someone suddenly calls out for the chief crafting officer. Medes and the others are standing nearby as the call comes through, and Setsubi waves his arms to get her attention. He yells out to her with a big grin, and just like that, the massive lantern crisis that was haunting the Demon Kingdom is officially over. Everyone can finally breathe easy knowing the job is done. Setsubi gets to work hanging the new lights while Nomi stands by laughing, totally happy with how it all turned out. Nomi is finally relaxing after a long day of work. She takes a big sip of her drink and feels like she's literally melting into her seat. Sigrise shows up and gives her a friendly wave. He asks the little lady if she's enjoying her drink while someone nearby calls out his name. He tells her that the day-night lantern she fixed is working perfectly and has been a massive help. He's just glad to hear things are going well, and then he leans in with a more serious look. He asks her how the rest of the remodeling project is coming along, but Nomi's face drops a bit as she explains the situation. Turns out Dawn stones are actually super rare and hard to find on the market. She says she's completely out of stock right now. She's got the trading department's manager out looking for more, but in the meantime she's just sticking to basic repairs on the original lantern to stay busy. Sigrise just nods along while he eats, taking in everything she's saying. He stops for a second and asks why she doesn't just swap them out for regular light magic stones instead, though Nomi immediately shoots that idea down. She explains that elemental stones cause a massive power overload because of how the magic crest copies energy. She admits it's been a real struggle trying to find a workaround, just as Medes walks up with a tray to join the conversation. Medes gives a warm smile and tells Nomi good work for the day, and the kid greets her back with plenty of energy. Sigrise speaks up, pointing out that Medes is looking way healthier lately. Medes is actually surprised he even noticed the change. She looks down and admits that getting the lantern problem off her plate was a huge weight off her shoulders. But that's not the only thing. She says following the advice to eat better and get to bed early has her feeling pretty great. Medes looks over and asks Nomi if the quality of the food is the real trick, and Nomi is all about it. The girl starts explaining how important it is to balance out protein like meat or eggs with plenty of vegetables for your skin. She starts going through the morning menu, mentioning things like steamed dishes and grilled pork wrapped in veggies. She suggests trying some lean magic steak and a salad, which gets Medes thinking she definitely needs to start trying that for herself. Nomi starts putting the pieces together, realizing Medes and Sigrise are from the same year and the Demon Lord is likely in that circle too. But she realizes she still hasn't seen the big boss show his face in the cafeteria even once. Nomi looks pretty worried as she wonders if the Demon Lord is just too busy to show up for a meal. She asks Sigrise if the big boss is actually doing okay, but the guy just stays quiet and keeps to himself. Back at the village, the chief is losing his mind and slams a document onto the table, yelling about what it means. Turns out they're getting blocked from trading because they were selling low-quality magic stones and lanterns for way too much money. The chief is busy cursing the people who cut them off when a villager suddenly bursts into the room in a panic. The guy yells that Nomi's old house has completely vanished without a trace, and he has no clue what's going on. The chief just tells him to shut up, screaming that they have way bigger problems to worry about right now. He's sweating bullets and wondering why everything is falling apart after they finally kicked that outsider girl out. The village has no idea they just started their own downfall by losing her. But back at the castle, Nomi is just relaxing. She looks super happy while sipping some chilled honey herbal tea that hits the spot perfectly. Medes walks into the room and greets Nomi, asking if that item she requested is finally finished, and Nomi looks a bit surprised but tells her she did a great job today, explaining she was actually going to bring it over herself, but Medes just brushes it off, saying she happened to be in the neighborhood anyway so it was no trouble. Nomi pulls the item out with a big smile and asks Medes to give it a quick check to see if it's exactly what she wanted, pointing out that the joint on the seal's handle had actually just worn down and gotten loose. She also mentions cleaning out the wax warmer and putting in a fresh magic stone so it actually heats up right. And as Medes tests it out, she's impressed that the annoying wobble is completely gone now. Medes admits she was ready to just buy a new one, so this fix is a lifesaver, making Nomi beam with pride. While Medes quietly decides she needs to give the girl a bonus, Nomi just stays humble about doing her job, but then Medes spots something weird and asks what the deal is with that massive goblet sitting on the desk. Medes gives Nomi props for her attention to detail as the girl shows off her latest project, and Nomi introduces it with a huge grin, calling her new invention the chili goblet, right as Medes touches it and realizes the metal is freezing, thinking this is just another weirdly useful thing Nomi's made. Nomi hugs Medes and explains how the forge heat is brutal, and all she can think about is a cold drink. So she gets a sparkle in her eye and tells Medes to just imagine how good it could be, listing off a whole menu of stuff like ice-cold milk, biscuits, hot chicken skewers, and even fizzy honey mead, pointing out that nothing beats that first cold glass of anything after grinding through a long day of work, since it just makes all that exhaustion disappear. Which definitely gets Medes' attention as she holds the goblet close and realizes the thing is actually ice-cold to the touch. Medes asks if she used a legendary ice magic stone to pull this off, but Nomi admits those are way too hard to find, so she just used a magic crest called Cold Field instead. Medes looks completely wiped out while asking if the magic on the cup is actually a barrier, thinking it's a massive waste of talent to use high-level magic just to keep a drink cold. But Nomi just tells her no, so Medes figures Nomi just has way too much natural skill for her own good. Medes asks if she can actually buy the cup, but Nomi says she'll just bring her one for free to say thanks, since she really just wants everyone to feel the joy of having a cold drink after work. Suddenly, the demon lord shows up out of nowhere, looking all serious and intense, which makes Nomi panic and promise to make him a cup too, even though Medes has no idea why he's there. Nomi shakes a bit while asking him what he actually needs from her, and the demon lord gets a little quiet, saying there's something he really wants her to see before he holds out his hands, leaving Nomi staring at whatever he's got and wondering what it could be. Nomi looks at the item in the demon lord's hands, wondering if it's just a tiny cushion, but the weird eye pattern makes her think the whole thing looks pretty creepy, and she can't help but jump a little when the demon lord mentions the pattern looked just like a magic crest she was sketching recently. Nomi takes a closer look, realizing he's totally right and getting a bit hyped about the discovery, staring at the eye symbol and figuring it must be some kind of illusion magic. It's definitely familiar to her, so she looks him right in the face and asks where he even found something like this. He's got a pretty calm look as he explains it's called a dream pillow, and it actually came straight out of the castle's secret treasury. Apparently, it's a top-tier magic item designed to give you amazing dreams, as long as you keep it right next to your head while sleeping. And the demon lord admits he used to use it all the time to get some decent rest between all his royal duties. It was great for a while, but now it's just a broken piece of junk that doesn't do anything anymore. He looks pretty bummed out about it, which makes Nomi a little skeptical since the thing feels so dark and gloomy. She asks if a creepy-looking thing like that could really give anyone a good dream, but then she decides to give it a shot and offers to fix it. Since she already knows how the magic crest works, she's pretty confident she can get it running again for him. Nomi asks the demon lord what kind of good dreams he actually gets from that creepy pillow, and he looks pretty pleased with himself as he explains he gets dreams where a nightmare creature squeezes him tight. Nomi is totally freaked out by his weird taste, realizing she barely knows how to respond to something that strange. She just tells him she sees, standing there awkwardly while she thinks to herself that their tastes are just way too different. She figures they'll never be on the same page, but later she gets back to work at her desk. Looking at the item, Nomi realizes it was probably just a cursed object to begin with, which makes sense because she sees the black hair sticking out is actually from a nightmare monster. The magic crest uses that hair to project illusions, and it's even designed to pull mana from anyone sleeping nearby. She's honestly pretty impressed with the craftsmanship, thinking about how much she'd love to fix it for him. The only problem is she doesn't have any fancy embroidery skills to fix the fabric, so she gets a bright idea. She figures that as long as the new item does the same job, a regular crafted tool should work just fine. Nomi starts to think a lantern might be the perfect replacement, but she's still trying to figure out how to make it all work together. Nomi thinks about the idea of a dreaming tool, wondering if there's a design that would actually fit something better than the old pillow. She remembers her past life, thinking about how much she loved using those warm, nice-smelling eye masks before bed, but then she thinks about other options like relaxing aroma sprays or the incense she used to burn. It all starts clicking, and she realizes an incense burner is the perfect solution. She's totally hyped on the idea, convinced it'll work out great, so she decides to call it a dream burner since it's meant for sleeping. She figures it needs a vibe check though, telling herself to make sure the design actually looks right for the Demon Lord's room. She sits down and starts sketching immediately, and as she maps out the structure, she realizes she's finally getting used to drawing these complicated magic crests. She doesn't want to waste time, so she locks in and focuses on the paper, determined to get every detail right. She works through the sketches until she finally finishes the drawing. She's pretty proud of the result, looking at the design and realizing that as long as she puts the nightmare hair inside, this new tool will work exactly like a dream pillow, just way more stylish. Nomi looks at her work, thinking about how amazing magic crests are. She still can't believe they actually let you see nightmares, but it gives her a great idea. She realizes if she uses them right, she can recreate stuff from her old life, so she decides to take notes later. She gets pumped and tells herself it's time to start on the main body of the burner, standing up with plenty of energy to hammer the metal and check every glass part with care, leading into her finally taking a break to wipe some sweat off her face. She says that hammering out metal definitely takes a ton of time, and it's way harder than the lanterns she's used to making. She can't just cut and solder pieces together for this one. She sits back down and gets back to work, telling herself she's almost done and just needs to push through a little bit more so she can finish the base. She holds it up and gets really excited, seeing that the hammered finish turned out looking great. Then she checks the fit of the decorative lid. She shows how the top cover is supposed to go on, and with that part finished, she sits at her desk to handle the final step. She says she just needs to place the magic circuit board inside to finish it up. Nomi focuses on the tiny details, saying half the space is for the magic stone mount and the switch while she plans out the other side for the catalyst. She tells herself that once the power lines are set and the top and bottom are connected, everything will be ready. She finally finishes the build and says it's done. Looking at the shiny metal burner sitting in the flowers, it's perfect. She holds it up and says it's a piece worthy of presenting to the Demon Lord, and then she starts geeking out over the material. She rubs her cheek against the metal, saying brass gets such a nice, mellow look the more you use it. She wants to test it out right away, but realizes she really doesn't want to mess with nightmare hair yet, so she decides that using chamomile tea will work just as well for a quick trial. She thinks chamomile hallucinations sound pretty fancy and gets the tea ready. She reaches out and clicks the power button to start the burner, but things get weird fast. These creepy little ghost faces start floating out of the steam, making her say the whole thing feels unnatural and not relaxing at all. She ends up totally losing it, saying the hallucinations are actually just really scary. Nomi tries to snap out of her freakout, saying she's got to set a timer because she'll be in big trouble if she accidentally stays asleep. She looks at the tea one last time and decides she won't be touching chamomile again for a very long time. Later on, she heads over to the office and lets herself in, giving the Demon Lord and Lady Medes a polite greeting. She brings up their last conversation and explains that since embroidery didn't work out, she went ahead and made something different. She shows off the finished product, calling it a magical device known as a dream furnace. The Demon Lord takes a good look at it and is totally floored by how beautiful the craftsmanship is. And then he asks with a bit of a stutter if this thing really works just like a dream pillow. Nomi breaks it down for him, saying that if he just puts some nightmare hair inside and keeps it right by his pillow, it should finally give him the ability to see dreams, which makes the Demon Lord's eyes go wide as he suddenly loses his cool and gets right in her face, asking if putting Garm fur in there means he can finally dream about Garms. Nomi stammers that nightmares have dream properties so it should work, but she's still worried. She adds that for any other creatures, they won't really know if it works until they give it a shot. Nomi is totally confused why he'd want to dream about a Garm since they're such terrifying creatures. The Demon Lord says he gets it, then gets hyped and says he's going to try it right away since he has tons of fur. He shouts about needing to get to the Sea of Fluff immediately, leaving Nomi standing there. Medes calls out to the demon lord with a serious look on her face, but then she zaps him with some magic, reminding him he still has a massive pile of work to finish, and the demon lord admits she's right, saying that leaving his work unfinished would definitely be bad for his sleep schedule. He looks back at Nomi with a soft smile and thanks her for giving him such a great gift. Nomi gets a bit flustered and tells him she's just really honored he likes it. Nomi clenches her hands together, saying she's happy he liked the gift, but she's still feeling pretty uneasy. She admits she feels kind of bad now, thinking that maybe she should have been more careful looking back at the dream furnace she finished yesterday. She starts to really overthink the whole situation. Nomi knows the quality was top tier, but she's just not sure if the demon lord actually had a good dream. She wonders if the guy even managed to finish his work and get to bed at all. And right then, the demon lord suddenly shows up. Just standing there silently peeking through the door, Nomi sees how rough he looks and immediately panics. Asking him what's wrong, she takes a closer look and asks if he ended up having a bad dream after all seeing his reaction. She gets even more confused and asks if he was looking for a good dream or a bad one. The demon lord makes a tiny sound, and Nomi's eyes go wide as she notices something is definitely up. Nomi takes a look at the furnace and realizes the entire circuit board is completely trashed, while she mentions that fixing this level of damage is going to be a real project. The demon lord just stands there looking pretty rough as he apologizes. Nomi looks up at him and asks if he just dropped it by accident, but he looks away, feeling terrible and admitting the whole situation is his fault. He starts explaining that he tried using it in his office and was actually having an amazing dream for once, and he was so excited about it that he wanted to show the furnace off to Medes and Sigrise. He shows how he held it out to them, but then things took a turn for the worse as he demonstrates how he tripped and started fumbling the device while everyone else just watched until it finally hit the ground. Nomi watches him explain the crash, thinking it sounds like some crazy chain reaction, so Sigrise asks if he actually got hurt in the fall, but he says he's fine since Medes already checked him over. Nomi tells the demon lord she's just glad he's not hurt. He looks pretty down, hanging his head while apologizing again and saying how much that item meant to him, so Nomi looks him right in the eye and promises him that she's doing okay and not to worry. She goes on to say that since she has to fix the furnace anyway, she's going to add some new upgrades to it, but it might take a bit more time to finish. Nomi gives him a big, confident smile and tells him she's going to get it fixed up for him no matter what. She even winks, saying this is exactly why she took the chief crafter job in the first place, and tells him to just leave the whole thing to her. But then she gets a bit serious. She warns him that another accident could easily happen if he's not careful, so he should really just keep the furnace by his pillow, and she starts scolding him a little, telling him he needs to actually stay in his bedroom and get some real sleep. The demon lord gets a little flustered and blushes, quietly telling her that he understands what she's saying. He heads out of the room while waving back, calling out to his dream world furnace and promising he'll wait for it forever. Nomi watches him go and starts walking off, thinking to herself that this job is actually turning out to be a pretty great place to work. Nomi heads over to the kitchen and calls out to Mr. Makari, letting him know she's there to collect all the bent spoons and forks that need fixing. The chef looks pretty happy to see her, saying that having her help really makes a huge difference. He explains that since the last crafter left, they haven't been able to repair anything, and their supply of tableware is getting pretty low, though he's still mostly just confused about why everyone keeps bending them. Nomi just laughs, but as she looks at the mangled fork, she realizes it's the same weird issue she saw with the lanterns. It hits her that maybe the demons in this castle are actually just way more clumsy than she thought, which gives her an idea. She thinks about embedding a magic crest into the demon lord's dream furnace to keep it from breaking, and she remembers seeing some notes about physical defense in her notebook, so she plans to test that out later. Still, she figures that putting that much work into simple kitchen forks is probably overkill. Nomi grabs the tray of mangled silverware to take back to her workshop, while the chef tells her he's really counting on her to get them fixed up. As she walks, she starts planning her next move, remembering that Setsubi mentioned most of the lanterns she repaired are already back in place around the castle. She realizes there's only one major thing left on her to-do list, so she tracks down Medes, who's currently taking a quiet moment to enjoy some tea. Nomi asks if she's on a break or if she has a minute to chat, and Medes happily tells her she doesn't mind at all. Nomi explains that since the castle lanterns are finally stable, she wants to get enough materials for the camp too, then asks if there's any word on the Dawnstones and Dark Rocks. Medes breaks the news that the trading department hasn't found any info on those specific stones yet, which leaves Nomi feeling pretty let down. But then Medes mentions the magic stone manager is actually coming to the castle tomorrow for the regular trading day, so she suggests that Nomi should just go talk to him. She figures Nomi hasn't had the chance to meet the guy yet, and Nomi gets a bit hopeful, asking if it would be alright for her to try speaking with him directly when he arrives. Medes tells Nomi it's no problem at all and says she shouldn't hesitate to ask if she needs anything for the meeting, making Nomi start wondering about the person in charge of the castle's magic stones. She can't help but curious what they're like, so she asks Medes who exactly they're doing this deal with this time around. Medes explains that since tomorrow is a day ending in the letter O, the trade is actually with the Dwarf Kingdom, which completely catches Nomi off guard. She repeats the name of the kingdom in shock, instantly thinking back to the mean village head who threw her out. Later on, everyone sits down at the table for a meal and says it's time to dig in, and the whole group starts eating, letting out a satisfied sigh as they enjoy the hot food together. Nomi thinks the soup is amazing since the marrow was simmered until it melted, realizing it tastes exactly like the tonkatsu ramen she remembers. She gets a bit giddy and jokes to herself that the only thing missing is some red pickled ginger. While next to her, Latu and Sigrise are losing it over how good the food is, both agreeing that the meal is absolutely delicious. Medes takes a sip and is totally floored, saying the soup is super mild but still really rich and has such a deep flavor. And that's when Makari pipes up to tell the Prime Minister that the whole dish was actually Nomi's idea. Nomi explains that the pig bones in the kitchen were just too good to waste, so she figured they'd be perfect for this, even though Makari admits he'd never even heard of anyone making soup out of bones before she showed up. He explains they followed her instructions exactly, adding the right spices and letting the pot simmer for 10 hours straight, making Medes completely lose it over the amount of work that went into it. 10 hours is a massive amount of effort for one dish, but Nomi just smiles and adds that it's actually great for your skin too, which definitely gets Medes' attention. Medes is so sold that she tells Makari he has to put this on the regular menu, while Nomi just feels good seeing her enjoy it. Over at the other end of the table, Latu is busy eating and says the soup is so good it warms him right to his core, and he starts thinking about how if he actually stayed at the castle, he'd get to eat this kind of incredible food every single day. Latu leans his head on his hand, looking totally wiped out as he mentions that as soon as today's trade audit is finished, he's heading out to camp for an expedition, and the guy looks like he'd rather be anywhere else, groaning about not wanting to go outside, while Nomi realizes that this audit is actually a pretty big deal. She starts putting the pieces together, remembering that the Dwarf Kingdom is actually visiting the castle today for a magic stone trade, which immediately starts making her nervous, since even though the kingdom is huge and the odds of seeing someone she knows are low, just the thought of it makes her stomach hurt. Just then, Sigrise grabs Latu's face and tells him to stop complaining, since they're all going to sleep way better now that the little lady made those dark lanterns for them. So Sigrise makes sure to thank her, while Nomi just stands there giving a nervous little laugh because of how intense the two of them are being. Sigrise leans in with a massive, scary-looking grin and tells her that her invention is a total lifesaver for the crew, leaving Nomi just staring back at him, barely able to get out a nervous yes while she tries to handle his energy. She keeps acting polite and nodding along, even though she's clearly feeling a little overwhelmed by everything happening around her. And it turns out that even though the lanterns are working great, they still don't have nearly enough of them to pass out to everyone in the entire unit yet. Nomi sits there sweating as she reminds herself that as the chief crafting officer, she's the one who needs to get all the ore for the magic crafting to upgrade the castle, so she's got to stay on top of the inventory and orders. And finally, she holds up her bowl and tells herself to just get over her trauma already. She slams back the rest of her food and finishes the meal, feeling a lot more ready to face the day. Moving on, Nomi yells for Latu to get moving so they can head to the magic stone exchange, and Latu can tell she's totally fired up, but just as they're about to take off, Nomi remembers something else she needs to take care of first. She looks pretty emotional as they say their goodbyes to Sigrise and the rest of the crew for now. And walking down the hallway later, Latu mentions how it's pretty cool that the demon lord seemed so grateful for what she did. He's curious though, so he asks Nomi what exactly it was that she gave the big boss. So she explains she actually made him a little trinket, but it ended up getting broken in a really bad accident. Nomi mentions how she went ahead and fixed up the trinket she made for the boss, even smoothed out a few extra issues while she was at it, explaining to Latu that she added physical defense to the piece, which finally makes everything click for him. Latu tells her that things are getting way more convenient thanks to her hard work, and gives her a massive thank you, leaving Nomi totally flustered as she stammers out a "you're welcome," her face turning bright red from the compliment. She thinks to herself that while she's happy, getting this much praise is actually pretty embarrassing. Moving on, Latu opens up a door for her and tells her to step inside, leading Nomi to look around the new area and ask if they've finally reached the trading room. Latu points out that they're actually in the room right next to it, which they use to keep watch and make sure no shady business or fights break out, further explaining that for any trade with other countries, They're required to have both the military and a civil official present. He adds one last detail, mentioning that from the other side of the glass, this entire observation window just looks like a regular painting. Nomi stares at the glass and realizes it's just a big two-way mirror. She looks over at Latu and asks if it's actually his turn to work today, but he just laughs it off, saying that being an observer is a job for the lower-ranked guys, not for the 4 heavenly kings. He explains that he actually got someone to cover his shift today. Also, he could take the time to show Nomi around, leaving Nomi completely stuck on what he just said as she asks if he really mentioned the 4 heavenly kings. Latu gives her a wink and strikes a pose, bragging that he's actually the second-ranked member of the Demon Kingdom's elite guard. Nomi's jaw just drops. She can't even process it and asks if he's actually for real. She thinks back to when they met, assuming he was just some regular official working under Medes, but looking at him now, she starts to see it, noticing that he actually looks way stronger than she realized, and her head starts spinning. She can't believe she's hanging out with the literal number 2 guy in the whole army. Nomi tries to be polite and thanks Latu for taking the time to show her around, but she's so nervous she ends up calling him Lord Latu. Latu tells her to cut it out because hearing the genius chief crafter call him that is just awkward, so he suggests she just uses a casual title instead. He leans in close with a big grin, practically begging her to stop being so formal with him while he checks the time and realizes they need to keep moving before they end up running late for their next stop. Just then, a girl in a sharp uniform walks past them, and Nomi is totally blown away by how cool she looks. She can't take her eyes off her, thinking about how beautiful she is and wondering if she's some kind of high-ranking noble lady. Nomi notices the girl is different since she doesn't have any horns or wings, but her fin-like ears and long hair are just stunning. She realizes that seeing someone with those features is actually pretty rare around the Demon King's castle, but Latu clears things up by explaining that she's the magic stone supervisor, and he tells Nomi they should go say hi. Latu calls out to her with a friendly greeting, and the girl stops in her tracks, looking back at them a bit surprised. The magic stone supervisor looks surprised to see Latu working and asks if he's actually on duty today, since seeing him on watch is pretty rare. Latu just plays it cool, saying he had a little business to handle, which leads him to explain with a smirk that he actually talked the guy who was supposed to be on duty into switching shifts with him. He suddenly pulls Nomi forward to introduce her, and while he's all energy, Nomi is totally caught off guard and starts getting really nervous, so she tries her best to be polite, stammering out a greeting and telling the supervisor it's nice to meet her. The supervisor looks at Nomi and immediately starts lecturing Latu, telling him he can't just go around kidnapping fairy children like it's no big deal. Nomi is completely stunned by the mix-up while Latu gets defensive, telling the supervisor that's a really messed up thing to say about him, and he laughs it off while leaning in, making it clear that she's definitely not some random fairy he snatched up. He gets serious for a second to set the record straight, explaining that she's actually the new chief crafting officer for the entire Demon King's castle. He does a big reveal, shouting out her name and introducing her as Nomi-san while she stands there looking like she wants to disappear. The supervisor stops and stares at Nomi, trying to process the fact that this tiny girl is actually a high-ranking official. Aquarine looks pretty confused because she could have sworn the new person was supposed to be a dwarf, so she asks Nomi if she's actually a gnome instead. Shaking off the confusion, she gives a friendly smile and introduces herself as Aquarine Lil Rayday, telling Nomi to just keep it casual and use her first name. Nomi introduces herself right back as Nomi Lasme D. Verger and asks to just go by Nomi. But as they talk, Nomi realizes the name sounds familiar and asks if she's related to Lord Sigrise, which Aquarine confirms by saying they're both from the Rayday clan. Aquarine mentions how Nomi ended up inheriting her grandfather's famous name, and Nomi explains that the Demon Lord was actually the one who gave it to her. Hearing that makes Aquarine smile, thinking about how happy her grandfather must be about his legacy continuing on like this. Nomi changes the subject a bit, mentioning she heard Aquarine was out on a trip recently to track down a specific magic stone. Aquarine explains that Lady Medes put in a sudden request for it, so she had to go all the way to the Beastman country, then asks Nomi if she was the one who ordered it. Nomi gets a little nervous seeing how much effort went into it and makes sure to thank her for doing such a tough job. The conversation gets cut short when Aquarine notices someone approaching and tells Nomi that their trading partner finally showed up. Nomi starts panicking a bit, telling herself she really isn't mentally prepared for whatever is coming next. Latu spots her and waves her over, calling out for her to join him by the door. He tells Nomi he's gonna leave the rest of the work to her, while she just tries to stay calm and tells herself everything will be fine. Just then, some older dwarves walk in carrying heavy crates of raw stones, and Nomi can't help but stare. She gets a good look at them and realizes they aren't the guys from her old village, which makes her feel way better. One of the merchants sets the crates down and tells Aquarine he's counting on her to take care of things again. Aquarine just gives him a confident smile and tells him to leave it all to her. Latu looks over and asks what they're actually doing, and Nomi admits she was wondering the same thing. Nomi realizes it's a magic stone appraisal, and Aquarine explains she has to check the quality and the specific attribute of every single stone. She goes on to say that while tools can measure power, you really need a good eye to check the attributes and the polish. Nomi points out that getting that good actually takes a ton of practice and time. One of the merchants tells Aquarine she's clearly got the magic stone appraisal eye, while Nomi just stands there impressed. Latu mentions she can do those appraisals with just a glance, and Nomi adds that even among dwarves, almost nobody can do that. Latu thinks it's a super handy skill to have. The merchant looks over the stone and admits the quality is actually pretty good. Aquarine asks if the usual price is okay, and the merchant tells her that works for him, but before they finish up he tells her he's got a quick question. Aquarine mentions she's currently looking for stuff called Dawnstone and Darkrock. Asking if they carry them, the guy explains that they mostly just handle the transport side of things, so they don't know a whole lot about specific stones. He follows up by saying they're a workshop that focuses strictly on magic stones, so they don't deal with anything else. Aquarine checks over her clipboard, mentioning she's not surprised by the answer since she's heard the same thing everywhere else. She hands over a deposit receipt for him to trade for cash at the vault, mentioning how much she appreciates their consistent quality. The merchant takes the paper and casually tells her that this level of work is just the standard for them. But then something suddenly clicks in his head, and he realizes he heard the guys from Dasadasa village were making a huge scene about their trade being cut off, so he asks if that's actually true. Nomi freezes up the second she hears the name of her old home. She can barely even get the words out while Latu just stands there wondering why she's suddenly acting so weird. Aquarine takes a second to think about it before remembering the place he's talking about. She explains they didn't actually cut them off, but just lowered the price because their quality tanked and they were being jerks about it. She can't even believe they had the nerve to try and sell stuff like that in the first place. Aquarine keeps venting, saying that the village wasn't even that great to start with. She explains they were only doing them a favor because some of their work used to be decent, but now that the quality has dropped, everything they make is completely worthless. The merchant just listens and agrees that there's really nothing they can do about it. Latu notices Nomi is totally out of it and asks if she's okay, while she just stands there shaking. She can't stop thinking about what the people back home are up to now. Latu decides it's time to move and tells her they should head over since it's their break anyway. Nomi just gives a tiny response as he starts leading her away from the counter. Aquarine finally catches a good look at Nomi's face and realizes something is seriously wrong. Latu tells Nomi she looks way too pale and needs to sit her butt down. He points out they have plenty of time before the next deal, so she should just relax and have some tea. Nomi gives a shaky thanks as they set a warm drink down in front of her, but her mind is still stuck on the conversation. She looks up from her cup and asks for a reality check on whether they really just said the name of her old village. Aquarine takes a seat and looks surprised, asking Nomi if she actually knows anything about a place like Dasadasa village. Nomi looks down at her tea and finally admits she actually lived there until just recently, so hearing the name just totally caught her off guard. Latu leans in and mentions he's been hearing some bad rumors about Nomi's old village, specifically how the quality of their deliveries has totally tanked lately. Aquarine jumps in to back him up, saying that both the magic stones and the crafted items they've been sending are basically trash now, but then she stops and looks closer. She gets right in Nomi's personal space, staring her down while asking exactly when she first showed up at the castle. Nomi looks pretty nervous under the sudden pressure and tells her it's only been about a month since she started. Aquarine just takes a second to process that and says she understands the situation now, relaxing back into her seat. The vibe shifts back to the task at hand as she asks Nomi if they're still going to talk about those magic stones she was asking about. She explains that even though Nomi heard the trade talk earlier, the truth is that nobody in the magic stone business has even heard of a Dawnstone. Nomi tries to clear things up, explaining that those stones were actually being sold at a jewelry shop back in the Dwarven Kingdom, but there's a reason they're so rare. She points out that the stones don't really have many practical uses, so the miners don't bother bringing much of it up from the ground. Aquarine leans back and lets out a sigh, finally getting why the stone is such a pain to find, while Nomi just sits there waiting to see what she says next. Aquarine mentions that since she's the one in charge of magic stones, pretty much every stone-related item in the Demon Lord's territory passes through her hands at some point, but she still has to ask Nomi if she's ever actually seen anything like that specific stone before. Nomi thinks it over for a second, realizing that if it's this hard to find, she might just have to go out and get it herself, just as Latu gets all fired up and yells that he just came up with a perfect idea. He points at her with a grin, suggesting they should all just go together on the next 4 Heavenly Kings patrol. It turns out this patrol is actually a pretty big deal in the Demon Kingdom, where every single month, one of the 4 Heavenly Kings visits the army forts and camps to keep monsters in check and keep an eye on bandits or other countries. Plus, it's a regular part of the job to show up in person and give the troops a little morale boost while they're out there. Cut to the trip, and Aquarine looks over at Nomi with a worried face, asking if the carriage is making her feel sick or if she's doing all right, but Nomi just puts on a brave face and tells her she's doing just fine. Nomi mentions she was totally fine even when they were fleeing her village, so it looks like she's just good with carriages. But Aquarine isn't taking the news well at all, calling the whole situation a really horrible story. She gets even more heated about it, saying she can't believe they'd actually kick out a little kid like Nomi, though she follows it up by saying Nomi is honestly way better off leaving a place like Dasadasa village behind. As the carriage rolls on, Aquarine explains that the Lil Company, the biggest one in the kingdom, already cut ties with the village, and since the smaller merchants pulled out too, she thinks the whole place is going to end up as a ghost town pretty soon. Nomi just stares off, quietly repeating the words ghost town to herself, thinking about how a small village is basically just one big workshop, meaning everyone will have to leave to find work elsewhere. She says she doesn't have a ton of good memories there, but it's still the place where she grew up, and with her parents' house and grave still there, the two of them just sit in silence as they ride. Aquarine leans back in the carriage, admitting that even though things were rough, leaving that village probably worked out for the best. But she follows it up by saying she knows Nomi can't just move on instantly since that place was her home. Nomi gives a big, genuine smile and says she's just so grateful to everyone at the Demon King's castle, making sure to thank Aquarine, which gets Aquarine fired up immediately as she yells that she has a great idea, leaving Nomi a little confused. She brings up how Nomi is supposed to be a genius crafter, so she asks if that means she's good at mining stuff too. And before Nomi can answer, Aquarine tells her she should learn appraisal, take over the trading world and become the chief magic stone officer, since having a real colleague around would make her life a whole lot easier. The idea of handling all that business and trading makes Nomi's head spin, and she can barely get the words out, so she just cries a bit and says she'd really rather skip the trading part, while Aquarine just laughs it off. Moving on, they finally reach their destination at MT, Mac, and Nomi looks out at the mountains, realizing this is where they'll be camping. Aquarine checks her notes and explains they're near the North Mountain, which isn't too far from the capital, but the high magic density makes the beasts around here pretty tough, when suddenly someone calls out to them. The uniformed guard salutes, saying Latu briefed him on the situation, and Nomi politely thanks him for the help, as he points out the supplies he dropped off from the wagon, telling the girls he's leaving the rest to them. He heads off to rejoin his unit, leaving the two of them alone to get their camp set up. Nomi starts to look a bit stressed, eventually admitting she's never actually pitched a tent before, so she turns to her companion for some guidance, hoping Aquarine knows what she's doing. Aquarine just gives a big wink and laughs it off, saying she has no idea how to do it either. Nomi just holds her head in her hands, seriously starting to think this whole trip is doomed from the start, but she tries her best anyway, trying to figure out if she just stands the pole up and drapes the cloth over. Nomi tries to figure out a plan for the tent, suggesting they bundle the cloth up and spread out the bottom, but the whole thing just collapses on them, and Nomi lets out a yell as they get buried under the fabric. The guard rushes over to check on them, asking if she's okay, while Nomi just lies there totally embarrassed, so she starts bowing and apologizing like crazy, while the guard just laughs it off and says he's glad they're safe. Once things calm down, Aquarine admits she thought she'd be way better at this, and Nomi can only sigh in agreement, confessing that she never expected something as simple as a tent to be this much of a struggle. They finally get inside, but Nomi realizes the floor feels like the bare ground, and Aquarine agrees it's barely better than sleeping outside. Moving on, Nomi decides they should at least try to get dinner started now that their base is finally up, mentioning that while she can cook, she's never actually tried to make a meal in the middle of nowhere. Aquarine just gives her a brilliant smile and admits she doesn't even cook at home, leaving Nomi stunned by the girl's honesty. Nomi looks over at Aquarine and mentions how she noticed something back when they were struggling with the tent, telling the girl she has this crazy air of elegance about her despite the mess they're in. Just as they're talking, a voice from outside the tent cuts them off as the uniformed guard asks for permission to come in, showing up with a big smile and waving to the girls while telling them they did a solid job out there today. He can't help but tease Nomi a little, mentioning that her scream from earlier really echoed through the area, which just makes Nomi turn bright red and groan from the embarrassment. Moving on, he sets down some food and explains it's their dried meat rations, pointing out they have a mix of beef, venison, and even some boar. Nomi looks down at the stack of meat with a pretty blank expression, asking if this is really all they're having for supper tonight. The guard just grins and pulls out the rest, showing her that they also have some hardtack and a bottle of wine to round things out. Nomi is still a bit confused though, so she asks him if they aren't planning on using a campfire to actually cook a hot meal, but the guard just shrugs it off, saying that since there isn't a mess crew around, everyone just makes do with these simple rations. He adds that honestly, putting out a fire is such a huge pain that they usually don't even bother starting one, leaving Nomi to just nod as she realizes how they handle things out in the field. The uniformed guard waves to the girls as he heads out, telling them to enjoy their meal, leaving Nomi and Aquarine to look over the pile of dried meat while they give thanks for the food. Nomi takes a piece and starts chewing, but it's a lot tougher than she expected. She struggles with it for a bit, complaining that the meat is rock hard and way too cold to enjoy. Nomi shivers and mentions how freezing it is, so Aquarine suggests the wine was probably meant to help them warm up, but Nomi immediately shuts that down, saying they can't be drunk mining when they have work to do. Since drinking is off the table, Aquarine decides they'll just have to move around to build up some body heat. The two of them start jogging in circles right there in the camp, trying their best to stay warm, which looks so strange from a distance that someone nearby wonders what kind of ritual they're doing. As they start walking later, Nomi is glad they finally ate, but Aquarine isn't so sure that filling up right now was the best move. Aquarine lets out a little laugh as Nomi reminds her they still need to get official permission to start their mining. But as Nomi looks around to see if they're in the right place, she hears a soldier nearby talking about how the jerky they get during patrol hits way different. The guard is actually pretty impressed, mentioning how crazy it is to have so many different kinds of food, and another one joins in, specifically pointing out that the boar meat they're eating is especially good. It's such a treat for them that one of the guards says she wishes the 4 heavenly kings would stop by every day just for the food. Nomi wonders what their normal meals are like if they're this hyped for rations, then steps up and asks for a moment of their time, eventually finding Sigrise to thank him for all his hard work and for the help he gave her earlier on. Sigrise just brushes it off with a laugh, telling her not to sweat the small stuff, though he does admit the living situation is way worse than the castle, so he suggests she just treats the whole thing like a little vacation. Nomi just stares back, thinking to herself that this is one seriously hardcore way to spend a vacation. Nomi looks up and asks the guards if it's finally okay for them to head out and start digging, and the guard is totally cool with it, realizing that was the plan all along and giving them the green light. He points out on the map that monsters shouldn't be a problem just across the road, but he still warns them to stay inside the campsite, telling Nomi to scream as loud as possible if anything goes wrong, which she promises to do with plenty of energy. Nomi cheerfully announces she's heading off, but Latu looks like he's barely holding it together in the back, staring off with a completely drained expression as he tells her to be careful out there in the wild. Nomi gives a nervous reply while Latu looks like he's totally given up on life, having fallen to the dark side from the stress. Aquarine watches him, saying she totally gets it because this camp is way rougher than the life they had at the castle, but Nomi is ready to move, telling Aquarine she can just stay back at headquarters if she wants, though Aquarine admits she'd definitely rather pass on joining the others. Nomi's eyes light up as she adds one more thought about why she's so determined to get started. Aquarine mentions that since she manages the stones back at the Demon King's castle, she's got a real interest in mining too, and Nomi just looks at her, telling her she's clearly as dedicated to her job as she's ever been. Aquarine quickly apologizes for the formal talk, which leaves Nomi feeling a little confused by the vibe shift, but then Aquarine winks and admits she actually wants Nomi to teach her how to dig so she can strike it rich. Nomi can't help but notice how honest she's being. But Nomi gets a serious look on her face and says that for real though, she's convinced the ground beneath them is literally overflowing with gold, silver, and all kinds of treasure. She tells Aquarine they should both do their best, and they high-five as Aquarine cheers along with the plan. Nomi takes a moment to bow toward the rock wall, thanking Lord Gnome and asking him to share just a little bit of the Earth's bounty with them today. Nomi closes her eyes tight and tells herself to focus, trying to feel for the right spot while energy sparkles around her, until she suddenly points off to the side, telling Aquarine that she found something right over there. Nomi gets her pickaxe ready and tells Aquarine to step back a little bit so she has room, then she swings hard into the dirt. She feels the vibration through the handle and realizes the ground is totally resonating, meaning they're definitely about to find some high-quality dwarven loot. Nomi can't hide her excitement and says this place is a total jackpot, laughing while she wonders what they'll find, and Aquarine is impressed by how reliable Nomi is, getting her own magic ready. Aquarine tells Nomi she's going to do her absolute best to help out too, and the two of them start digging until a massive pile of shiny stones is sitting on the tarp. Nomi mentions they can mine a ton of stuff here, and Aquarine agrees. She's shocked they're finding so much so easily when they're barely outside of town. Nomi picks up a piece and shows her how the magic stones and earth magic stones are all mixed together in one chunk, and while the quality looks great, Nomi stares at the stone and starts to wonder if there's more to it. Aquarine takes a small tool and starts working on the rough stones they found, carefully cleaning them up until she sees what's underneath, and she tells Nomi she's totally amazing for finding top-quality gems like this so fast. She holds up a perfectly polished stone that's glowing bright. Nomi winks and says these magic stones are great, wondering if the magic in the land is just super dense. Aquarine is a bit confused though, saying they only looked okay before they got polished up. Nomi just brushes it off with a casual "oh well," leaving Aquarine wondering how they got so lucky. They keep looking and find botanical peat, along with the dawnstone they wanted and some moonstones and royal stones too. Nomi adds that they even found some amazonite, which is a beautiful blue-green gem perfect for jewelry. She starts thinking the Demon Kingdom is actually packed with crazy resources, while Aquarine realizes you can really only learn this stuff out in the field. Aquarine is totally hyped after seeing the pile of loot they gathered, and she tells Nomi that having a haul this big really gets her energy up for more work. Nomi looks back at her with a big smile, saying that things are definitely going their way. And as they keep walking across the rocky ground, she mentions they might even find some really high-end gems if they're lucky. After a while, the exhaustion starts to set in. Aquarine mentions just how much digging they've been doing, and Nomi can't help but agree that they've really been grinding. Looking at the bag, Aquarine points out they only found a tiny bit of the dark rock they needed, but since they got so much dawnstone and other gems, it's still a huge success. Aquarine suggests she can handle cleaning up the raw materials herself before they split everything up. Nomi feels a bit bad and asks if she's really okay taking on the extra work. Aquarine doesn't mind at all and tells her with a big smile to just leave it to her. Nomi starts getting excited, thinking that remaking the lantern is going to be a total piece of cake now, and she figures she can even start polishing the stones right there in the tent, but she suddenly stops in her tracks when she looks around the small space. She rubs the back of her head, feeling a bit silly because she completely forgot that this cramped spot is actually where they have to sleep tonight. Nomi is totally wiped from all the digging, so she suggests they grab a quick bite and hit the hay, which Aquarine thinks is a great plan. They sit in the tent and eat their dinner until Nomi grabs her lantern and asks Aquarine if she can kill the lights. Aquarine looks a little confused, but suddenly the whole place goes pitch black. She's tripping out, asking if it's already morning because she can't see a single thing. She's completely lost, wondering what is even going on until she realizes Nomi is just standing there with the lantern. She asks how a regular light could cause all that. Nomi explains it's actually a special lantern that makes darkness, using those dark rocks Aquarine helped find specifically to block out the light. Aquarine takes a closer look, finally getting why they needed those stones, and she's honestly blown away. She admits she has no clue how it works, but the craftsmanship is on a whole other level compared to the old master's stuff. She gets super excited and begs Nomi to make a dark lantern for her too. Aquarine is totally hyped about the new lantern and asks if she can pay extra for it, but Nomi tells her that's not necessary at all, so Aquarine offers to buy her a drink later on instead. Nomi says she'd love that and laughs a little as the two of them finally settle in for the night, though trying to sleep on the ground is way harder than it looks. Aquarine complains about how much it hurts, and she honestly has no clue how the soldiers can handle living like this. She mentions that the guards even sleep in their armor, which makes Nomi realize just how tough those guys really are. Moving on, Nomi starts shivering like crazy and asks if it's actually winter because of the freezing air, but Aquarine reminds her winter ended months ago. It's just how the mountains are at night, leaving Nomi feeling pretty miserable since no one told her the temperature would drop this much. She just huddles there, wondering why she's still so cold even after grabbing extra blankets for herself. Nomi shivers like crazy, wondering if working out would help her deal with this. It's way past just getting used to it now, and while they're both trying to settle in, Aquarine calls out to her. Nomi just gives a quick answer from under her pile of blankets. Aquarine looks over and asks if she can snuggle up next to Nomi to try and stay warm, but Nomi starts blushing and admits she was actually going to ask the exact same thing since she's freezing too. The two of them huddle together under the covers. The extra body heat feels like a total lifesaver for them both, and as they get comfortable, Aquarine mentions that she actually has mermaid blood in her. She says most people think she's great with the cold because of it, but she really prefers everything in moderation. Nomi looks pretty surprised hearing that, just repeating back the fact that Aquarine is of mermaid descent. Aquarine smiles and explains that since her dad is a merman, that makes her a half-mermaid, which leads to Nomi opening up as well. She tells Aquarine that she's actually a half-dwarf, sharing her own heritage while they talk. Nomi smiles, finally feeling comfortable enough to tell Aquarine that her father is actually a dwarf. Aquarine mentions that she kind of suspected it since Nomi didn't really look like a dwarf, then quickly says sorry. She looks a little concerned, and adds that Nomi probably hates hearing people talk about how she looks different. Nomi jumps up immediately and tells her it's really not like that at all. She looks down and admits she did worry about not fitting in back at the village, but she doesn't actually mind anymore because looking this way reminds her of her mother. Aquarine listens closely and starts to open up about her own life too, saying she was the only one in her circle with a different hair color, and people used to say it was weird. But she smiles and says she's actually proud of it now since it's the exact same color as her dad's hair. Nomi looks at her with total admiration and tells her that her ice blue hair is honestly just beautiful. Aquarine blushes and gives a genuine smile, telling Nomi thank you for the kind words, but Nomi starts looking down at her own hands, wondering where she stands in all of this. Her mind wanders back to the village, thinking about how her life there before regaining her memories is just a blur. She spent her whole time in the Dwarven Kingdom hiding under a hat because her dad told her to. Looking back, she realizes she didn't actually hate her hair color. She just hated being treated like an outcast by everyone. Aquarine asks if she's finally okay with it, and Nomi admits things have changed since she arrived in the kingdom, and she remembers Medes telling her that it would be a total waste to keep such beautiful hair hidden away. Nomi runs her fingers through her long hair. Thinking about everything that's been said, she looks over at Aquarine and asks if she thinks she can really be proud of her look from now on. Aquarine doesn't even hesitate, smiling back and telling her she's absolutely sure that's going to happen. Aquarine finishes her thought, telling Nomi that her sparkling hair is just incredibly beautiful, and after a long silence, Nomi manages to whisper out a genuine thank you. As they settle under the blankets, Aquarine tells Nomi good night, and they finally drift off, waking up some time later. Nomi lets out a big stretch to get her blood flowing again. She notices her body is a bit sore, but the pitch blackness helped her sleep so deeply that she actually feels pretty good thinking about how the soldiers usually have to sleep in harsh conditions with bright lights everywhere. Nomi says she's really glad they made those dark lanterns, while Aquarine stands beside her letting out a massive yawn. Aquarine looks over with a smile and tells Nomi that it's a really nice evening, and Nomi smiles right back, agreeing that it's a beautiful evening for her too. The two of them share a quiet moment before deciding they're both ready to get moving. Nomi calls out for Sigrise to get his attention, while Aquarine lets him know they're done digging and are finally heading back. Sigrise just chuckles and says he understands, thanking both of them for putting in all that hard work out there. Latu isn't exactly thrilled about them leaving so soon, yelling out that it's totally not fair. But honestly, more camping was just impossible for a sheltered half-dwarf and a mermaid. As they start walking away, Nomi lets out a tired sigh and mentions how stiff her shoulders are getting, and Aquarine feels it too, saying her body feels heavy even though she slept, while Nomi wishes the camp was a bit more cozy. Nomi realizes they have some time before their ride gets there, so she suggests eating a snack the head chef packed, which catches Aquarine totally off guard, and she asks if Nomi was really hiding something that delicious the whole time. Aquarine teases her for being so sneaky, but Nomi just laughs it off with a classic saying about doing what the locals do, and as she pulls out the treats, Nomi tells her to dig in, joking that she's basically bribing Aquarine to keep her quiet. Nomi pulls out a loaf of dark bread filled with dried fruit, and it looks amazing as Aquarine takes a bite, recognizing it as the special kind they serve back at the dining hall. Nomi gets emotional, saying a simple piece of bread can bring so much happiness, especially with that sweet and tart fruit mix that pairs perfectly with cheese or wine. She keeps munching away, thinking it's the best snack ever while enjoying the cool breeze out in the field. As they walk, Nomi mentions that she really wants to hop in a bath the second they get home, but Aquarine stops her, mentioning she heard the castle's bathhouse is actually broken right now. Before Nomi can react, Aquarine suddenly yells for her to look out, just as someone nearby is busy checking a wooden perch. Nomi starts tearing into the bread, mentioning how it's time to eat, but she barely gets a second to enjoy it before she notices something moving fast. Aquarine screams for Nomi to watch out as a shadow dives right at her. Nomi yells in total shock, leaning back just as she realizes it's a crow. She freaks out, calling it her natural enemy, while her snack drops right into the dirt. She lets out a heartbroken shout, realizing the bird was aiming for her food the whole time. She snaps and tells the bird there's no way she's letting it go, lunging forward to grab the plump thing. She holds it up, thinking it looks pretty delicious and kind of nostalgic. Nomi starts thinking back to the days she spent mining in the forest with her dad, remembering how she used to set up all kinds of traps just to catch birds for dinner. So she laughs and tells the bird that going after her bread was a fatal mistake. She's got it trapped and says it's really going to regret messing with her. The bird starts losing it and flapping around while Aquarine runs over, asking if Nomi is even okay, but she stops dead in her tracks with a totally confused look on her face. She takes a closer look and asks if that's actually a cloud-hiding bird Nomi is holding, explaining that they're usually super shy and run away fast, so she can't believe Nomi caught one with her bare hands. Nomi just smirks and says it's karma for the bird being greedy and trying to steal her lunch, but Aquarine gets all hyped up, saying it's actually called a phantom gourmet bird because it's so rare and the meat is top tier, which makes Nomi decide it'll be the perfect gift for Mr. Makari back at the kitchen. Aquarine cuts in to explain a different side to the bird, but Nomi just stands there looking totally lost, while Aquarine mentions that these birds can actually become familiars if they're trained right, leading Nomi to look down at the round little creature and ask what a familiar even is. Aquarine realizes Nomi might be out of the loop, so she explains they're animals that follow a master's orders and asks if she remembers the crows at the castle, which makes Nomi realize she's talking about the ones Lady Medes uses. Nomi stares at the tiny bird in her hands, doubting if something this squishy can really do any actual work, but the bird starts flapping its wings like crazy in her face until she tells it to knock it off. Aquarine leans in and asks Nomi to give her a second, reaching out toward the bird to perform a quick spell, announcing that she's successfully linked Nomi's magic to the bird with a chain. She finishes the job by telling Nomi that as long as she uses her magic and gives an order, the bird will have to listen. Nomi looks down at the bird in her hands, totally amazed by the magic she's seeing. She admits that it really is magic, and Aquarine explains it's just a basic magic manipulation spell. She tells Nomi that controlling familiars is just standard stuff for Imagine, so she encourages Nomi to give it a shot and give the bird a command, since she doesn't need any special magic to make it work. Aquarine reassures her that even if she lets it go, the bird will come back when called, but Nomi is still feeling pretty nervous about it. She wonders if she should use magic the same way she does for polishing stones, and then she tells the bird it's free to go and lets it fly off, but the second she calls for it to come back, it instantly warps right into her face, which totally catches her off guard. Nomi can't believe it actually worked, realizing the bird was basically just summoned back to her arm. Aquarine points out that this is the bird's special trait, explaining it's so hard to catch because it can use spatial magic. She goes on to say that if Nomi trains it right, it'll even be able to deliver letters for her. Nomi gives a little laugh, looking at the tiny creature and telling it that it's actually surprisingly smart. Nomi thinks to herself that she originally planned on selling or eating the bird, but after hearing how it works, it actually seems pretty useful, and on top of that, she's starting to think the little guy is actually kind of cute. Nomi asks Aquarine if they're going to need a bird cage for it, or if keeping pets in the dorms is even allowed. Aquarine thinks it over and says since it's a familiar, a cage probably isn't necessary. She explains that the crows at her place just roam around whenever they aren't needed, and since people use them for messages, it's not a big deal. Nomi says she gets it, realizing these birds are just a normal part of life here. She figures if it has other bird friends in the castle, it won't ever get lonely. Looking at the bird, Nomi thinks about its species name and realizes Ku-chan doesn't quite fit the vibe she's going for. She starts to come up with something else, deciding that from now on she's going to call it Clue. Nomi tells the bird its new name and says it's nice to meet him. The bird starts chirping back and Nomi just laughs, telling the little guy he's so ugly cute that she can't help but like him. Nomi looks at her new bird friend settling in, thinking about how they just scored a new roommate, or a familiar really, and it's a pretty cool addition to the place. She sits down at the table to relax, thinking back on the trip and realizing that mining on-site after such a long time was actually a ton of fun. But then she lets out a heavy sigh while holding her cup, the exhaustion from the whole trip finally starting to hit her. Nomi looks completely wiped out, admitting to herself that camping out in the wild was way tougher than she ever thought it would be. She can't stop thinking about how miserable the conditions were. It was freezing cold and the ground was incredibly hard and rough to sleep on. And to make matters worse, she remembers how she and Aquarine had to choke down food that was just as cold and hard as the dirt they sat on. She realizes that if she's just going out there to do some mining, a quick day trip is definitely the way to go from now on. But then her mind shifts to the guys like Latu and the other Heavenly Kings who have to go out on long patrols, thinking about how those soldiers and commanders like Sigrise are stuck living in those rough camps without any of the comforts she has back here. Standing there with her drink, Nomi decides she wants to find a way to make life a little better for them, even if she can only improve things a tiny bit. Nomi notes that while the soldiers seem okay with the cold, she's planning to mass-produce these dark lanterns, making sure every single person gets one, hoping it'll finally help them get some decent sleep. She figures the light situation is handled, so all that's left to deal with is the food, which she realizes is a massive problem while she tries to choke down her own meal. The rations are just cold, dried meat, and hardtack so tough it has to be softened in the mouth before anyone can even chew it, making her worry the guys won't have the energy to fight on a diet like that. She thinks about how nothing beats warming the body from the inside out with something hot, and remembers the electric kettles from her past life, which sparks a sudden idea that makes her realize there's actually something way more convenient than a kettle already being used in the castle. She thinks of the baths that use magic stones to get hot water instantly, and knows she can use that tech. Nomi gets pumped and decides she's definitely going to move forward with this new idea. She says goodbye to her bird, Clow, telling it she's off to work, and to stop by the workshop later for a snack. As she heads out, she starts thinking about the two different ways she could actually build a cooking pot. There's casting, which is just pouring melted metal into a mold. But then there's forging, which involves hammering metal into shape, and she realizes there's a small press machine right there in the crafting room. Since she wants to mass-produce these and keep them light, she decides to go with the forging method for now. She sits down to plan the structure, thinking it's probably better to have separate switches for the fire and water stones. That way people can get plain water if they want, or they can just use the fire side to roast some meat. They could even stir-fry their food first and then add water later, making the whole process way more convenient, like a deep hot plate that also handles the water, and the thought of it makes her eyes light up. Nomi sketches out a two-tier design to keep the magic stone and circuit board separate, making maintenance way easier for later on. She thinks about putting the switch on the outside, but she's still trying to figure out the best way to handle the controls, wondering if a volume knob would work better to give people fine control over the water and heat. The design finally looks ready, and Nomi gets all hyped up because it's time to actually start on the prototype. She cheers out loud, saying she can't wait to build it, while her little bird watches her get to work. But things don't go as planned. Nomi ends up slumped over her desk, groaning about how sure she was that this would work. The pot itself came out great and the machinery was perfect, but she's still stuck because there's a major problem with the prototype sitting right in front of her. Turns out the dial switch is a nightmare. The sweet spot for the water and fire is so narrow that it's impossible to get the right setting. She decides she'll just adjust the output through the wiring and use a simple on/off switch instead. Nomi lets out a big sigh, feeling pretty bummed that the adjustment switch she put so much work into just didn't work out, so she tries to look on the bright side, telling herself that keeping the structure simple is actually the right move anyway. She figures it'll use way fewer materials and make the whole production process faster. And on top of that, it'll be way easier to fix if it breaks, since making things too complex just turns repairs into a total headache. Even though her first idea was cool, she realizes she has to let it go and focuses back on the pot in front of her, swapping the dial for a push-button switch instead, which she realizes will actually help keep it from turning on by accident. She holds the finished product up with a huge smile, deciding to name it the Magic Stone Pot now that it's finally done. Nomi is so excited about her new invention that she goes running through the halls, desperate to find someone to show it to. She heads toward the dining hall thinking someone might be grabbing a midnight snack, and as she peeks inside, she spots the Prime Minister and calls out to Medes, totally relieved to have found her. Nomi peeks into the dining hall and asks if she can come in. Medes gives her the okay, and Mr. Makari shouts out a friendly greeting as the chef starts raving about her tonkatsu noodle soup, mentioning it's a huge hit and that half the customers already ordered it today. Nomi gives a big smile, saying she's just really glad the recipe suited everyone's tastes, but right as she says that, her stomach lets out a loud growl, making her admit that talking about the food is making her pretty hungry too. Mr. Makari says he'll go get a meal ready for her and tells her to wait right there, while Nomi thanks him for being so nice. Once the chef leaves, Medes looks over at her curiously. Nomi notices the look and quickly gets her attention because the Prime Minister is actually staring at the item in her hands and asks what that pot is, which reminds Nomi why she ran all the way there in the first place, explaining she made a magic stone pot before reaching out to press the new button. She shows off how the water comes right out of the pot and heats itself up automatically. It's a total game changer for cooking anywhere. Medes is pretty impressed, noting how handy it is to be able to heat things up without needing a fire. Nomi is super hyped, telling Medes that with this pot, you don't even have to bring water along anymore. She's already imagining drinking tea wherever she wants and asks if that isn't the most convenient thing ever, but Medes just looks at her with a pretty unsure face, only giving a hesitant reply that she guesses she's right. Nomi's a bit confused by the weird vibe until the Prime Minister lifts a finger and casually swirls water right into the air. Nomi completely loses it, realizing she totally forgot that Medes can just create water out of thin air using magic, making her little invention feel a bit redundant for a second. Just then, Mr. Makari comes back with a tray, letting them know the food is ready, but he stops in his tracks when he sees the magic stone pot. He's blown away that it can produce its own water and calls it super useful, so Nomi explains it's all thanks to the water magic stone she put inside, which makes the chef even more excited. He tells her that not every demon can actually control water, so a tool like this is a massive help in a kitchen, leading Nomi to realize she might have underestimated her own work. She admits she's pretty much in the dark about how magic works for everyone else in this kingdom, so Medes leans in to comfort her, explaining it's totally normal for her to be confused. She points out that magic is just as foreign to her as Nomi's crafting skills are to the demons, and while it's true that demons are born with an edge when it comes to using magic, there's a catch to how it works because they can't just use whatever element they want. It all comes down to their family history and personal traits, meaning most people are actually stuck with just one specific type. Mr. Makari explains that he's actually a fire mage. Turns out most of the guys working in the kitchen use fire, while only a few can handle water. The chef points to himself with a proud look, saying it's just a clear case of the right person being in the right job, which is why everyone considers Medes to be so special. She's what they call a hydrocurrent mage, a super rare type who can control both water and wind at the same time. Nomi is completely blown away by this, watching Medes adjust her monocle while thinking about how incredible the Prime Minister really is, but then Nomi remembers something and asks a question. She points out that Medes was shooting lightning earlier, so she wonders if that means she isn't actually a lightning mage. The room goes quiet as Medes and the chef just stare at her with blank expressions. Nomi can't help but feel like she said something weird. Medes finally breaks the silence, explaining that lightning is just a combination of water and wind. Nomi loses it, realizing the science is exactly the same as back in the human world. Suddenly, Nomi gets another idea and asks the chef if a fire mage like him should be able to warm things up, which makes Mr. Makari stop to think for a second. He admits that there might not actually be a specific magic spell just for warming things up, because, while he could definitely heat up some water by chucking a fireball into it, there's no way he could ever get the temperature just right doing that. Nomi starts to realize how this specific type of fire magic is actually supposed to work. Medes notices a change and points out that the water is finally starting to boil in the pot. She looks pretty impressed, mentioning that this new feature Nomi came up with is actually really great, since it means they'll finally be able to enjoy warm tea while they're working in the office. Mr. Makari chimes in, saying that having water ready like this is a total lifesaver and he'd love one for the reception room. Nomi thinks a pot looks weird in an office, so she decides a kettle is next. Looking down at the food on the table, someone realizes it's been sitting out for a while. The chef looks a bit bad about it, apologizing because they got so caught up talking that the meal got cold. Nomi gets a bright idea and tells him they should just put the food in the pot to reheat it. That way, everyone can actually enjoy their meal while it's still piping hot. The chef looks like a light bulb just went off in his head. He tells Nomi that if she can actually make that happen, then it would be the perfect setup for serving things like stew or fondue. Nomi gets super hyped, saying that sounds like an amazing idea. Medes steps in and suggests they should start by extracting the water from the dish, and Nomi is all for it. So Medes uses her magic to lift the liquid right out of the bowl, and the food starts steaming up as it hits the right temperature. Nomi finally takes a big bite and can't help but make a happy sound. She's glowing as she says the meal is finally piping hot and tastes delicious, making it feel like pure bliss to be warm again. She's so satisfied she even jokes that the steam tastes good. But then she gets a bit thoughtful, mentioning how she really wishes they could find a way to deliver this hot food to the camp workers too. Medes realizes Nomi was just out at the camp and thanks her for working so hard, though she reminds her that the food rations for the workers have actually gotten way better than they used to be. The demon lord actually started things off by bringing in all sorts of dried meats, and he even made sure they used spices and different seasonings to make it better. Nomi remembers that while the meat was pretty tough to chew, the flavor was actually really good. It was the kind of thing she'd love to just snack on with some wine while hanging out in a warm room. Nomi tells Medes that the soldiers actually like the food a lot, and Medes sounds a bit surprised when she asks if that's really true. Medes figures it makes sense though, because before Nomi showed up, they were stuck with nothing but boar meat that was just salted and dried until it got old. And hearing that makes Nomi feel so bad for them she says she could almost cry. She takes a bite of her food and thinks about how crazy it is that tough meat and hard biscuits were actually the good version of their ration. She realizes that even though she can make hot water whenever she wants now, spending all that time and effort to cook every single meal is a huge pain, so she starts wishing that things like cup noodles or instant ramen existed in this world, because nothing beats the convenience of just pouring in some hot water and having a hot bowl of ramen ready to go. Nomi starts remembering how non-fried noodles are made back in her old world by using hot air to dry them out. She figures dried vegetables are probably made the same way, and then it hits her that if she evaporates the water from the soup, The salt and all that savory flavor should just turn into crystal. She gets this look in her eye and decides they need to find a way to extract the water, since drying things out is really just about getting rid of the moisture anyway. Nomi realizes she has the perfect solution and rushes over. Calling out to Medes, she asks her if she can use that water-draining magic from earlier on this bowl of noodle soup. Medes looks a bit confused and asks how much water she should remove, wondering if she just wants to thicken the broth up a little bit. Nomi tells her that's not it at all and says to forget about just doing the broth in the pot. She wants Medes to use her magic to drain every single drop of moisture out of the noodles and the ingredients. Medes sits there quietly for a second before someone calls out Nomi's name, and the chef starts freaking out, warning them that doing this is going to make the food completely inedible. Medes admits she can pull it off, but she's really not feeling it. She thinks it's a total waste to go out of her way to ruin a perfectly good meal like this. Nomi puts her hands together and starts begging, apologizing for the crazy request, but asking them to please just trust her. Medes gives a tired look and says she's still against the idea, but since Nomi is so dead set on it, she'll give it a shot. She snaps her fingers and all the water flies right out of the bowl. The noodles look like a solid block now. Nomi gets all excited seeing the result and tells them it's actually perfect. She holds the bowl up with a huge smile, explaining that with this method, they can finally get warm food delivered out to the camp. The two of them just stand there looking totally confused by her plan. Meanwhile, Latu is sitting around bored. He sighs, thinking about how it's already been a week since Nomi and the others left. Latu is slumped against some bushes at the camp, thinking about how even though he's used to this life from moving up the ranks, roughing it out here is still a total pain. He starts yelling about how unfair Nomi is being since she got to go back to the castle while he's stuck here. He's daydreaming about the warm cafeteria and having a nice meal with Medes when a guard suddenly runs up shouting for him and Sigrise. Latu snaps out of his daydream and looks over to see what the commotion is about. Sigrise just drops out of a tree right in front of them, asking what the big deal is, totally scaring the guard in the process. The guard catches his breath and reports that some supplies just showed up from the castle. Sigrise figures Nomi must have sent them something she made, but looking at the weird object in his hand, he's got no clue what it's supposed to be. Latu checks it out and sees there's a pot and a letter included. He starts reading it out loud. Nomi wrote a message thanking them all for their hard work and hoping this new invention helps them out. Latu starts following the instructions on the letter, setting up the pot and peeling the package to drop the dried noodles inside. Sigrise watches with a skeptical look, asking if this is actually going to work, but Latu just tells him it smells great while he hits the water switch. Sigrise is totally floored that water just comes out for anyone. Then Latu hits the main power button and tells him they just have to wait. As the pot heats up, Sigrise catches a whiff of the scent and loses it, but Latu tells him to chill out because it's not even done. He explains that once the pork gets soft, you just turn it off and let it sit. Sigrise can't believe his eyes and yells, asking why there's high-quality tonkatsu ramen in the middle of a camp. Latu just laughs and says the pot did all the work, while Aquarine stands nearby wondering what ramen even is. Latu spots the rest of the crew and calls out, telling them they showed up at the perfect time. He hands off the gear and tells the girls the recipe is right there in the letter, so they should just follow that. Latu points out that they can just serve it straight from the pot, which Sigrise finds pretty interesting. But Latu is quick to tell Sigrise to make his own batch because this one belongs to him, leaving the big guy groaning. Just then, one of the girls calls out to Latu, catching his attention while she looks at her food in total disbelief. She says she actually made it herself, even though she thought she was a disaster at cooking. She's so hyped that she calls the pot magic, which actually catches Latu off guard. Nomi hears her and smiles, thinking about how much she wishes the chief crafter could hear people talking about his work like this. Moving on, the girl gathers everyone around while Latu warns them to start eating fast so the noodles don't get soggy. Sigrise finally gets his own station going and asks Latu if he put enough water in the pot yet. Latu calls out Sigrise for messing up the water levels, pointing out that 80% definitely doesn't mean half empty. Sigrise just slumps over repeating the number to himself, while Latu realizes the big guy is way more clumsy than he looks. Deciding it's time to finally eat, Latu looks down at his bowl with a huge grin and claps his hands together to give thanks for the food, ready to dive right in. He starts slurping down the noodles like crazy, his face flushing from how good the hot meal actually tastes, finishing the entire bowl in record time. He licks his lips and lets out a long, satisfied breath. As he sits there, he starts feeling a bit guilty about Nomi, thinking to himself that he's sorry for ever thinking she was being unfair. He realizes she's been working her tail off this whole time, which brings a genuine smile to his face. The taste is a total hit, and Latu thinks about how these noodles are easily as good as the ones they serve at the castle. Nomi looks over at him with a proud expression, telling him she can really see all the effort he put into making this happen. Latu takes a second to breathe, feeling the heat from the food finally hitting him as he realizes that even though it gets colder the closer they get to the North Mountain, he hadn't noticed just how deep that chill had gotten into his bones, making him realize what a huge blessing warm food is. He puts his hands together to give thanks for the meal, looking totally refreshed, and thinks to himself that he never would have expected a simple camp meal to be this satisfying. But just as he mentions wanting a drink to top off the night, a messenger bursts into the area shouting for attention. The guard reports that the 2nd Patrol team spotted a massive rock bird heading their way from the south. Sigrise looks pretty impressed by the news, noting that a bird that size is actually a pretty big catch. Latu gets a bit of an attitude, grumbling about how the monster is totally ruining his post-meal chill time. Sigrise just brushes it off and grabs his weapon, saying a fight is the perfect way to work off their dinner. Sigrise says since the noodles were so delicious, he's going to bring back this catch in one piece as a thank you, and Latu is totally down to get this over with fast. Sigrise gives the order for everyone to get ready for the fight, and the whole squad salutes back, ready to jump into action together. Latu watches the massive rock bird fly right where they want it. Mentioning how they successfully lured the thing out into the open, Sigrise takes the lead and shouts for the first strike, telling the team to let loose with their stone arrows. The guards all focus their power and launch a barrage of magic, with Latu leading the charge as they blast the giant bird from all sides. Latu is actually pretty impressed by the firepower, saying the rapid-fire magic is awesome while the bird just takes a heavy beating. Sigrise doesn't give the monster a second to breathe and calls for a follow-up, ordering the team to fire off the wave blade attack next. He lets out a loud shout as the magic connects, slicing right through the target with enough force to end the struggle. Latu looks on as the massive bird finally goes down, calmly stating that the whole thing is finally over. Latu calls out to Sigrise to check in, and Sigrise just shouts back in excitement, looking hyped that they finished the job so smoothly. Sigrise stands over the massive bird and lets out a long sigh. He's actually a bit confused, asking if that thing was just weak since it didn't even put up a fight. Latu looks it over and points out that size-wise, the bird actually looked a lot bigger than normal. As he stands there thinking about the battle, he starts to realize something. He mentions that his magic felt way smoother today, and his stone arrows were way faster and more accurate than they usually are. Latu adds that his whole body feels super light, and Sigrise starts stretching, admitting he feels the same way. Sigrise wonders if there was something special about today, and then it suddenly hits him. He asks if all this extra power is actually coming from those tonkatsu noodles they had for lunch. Moving on, Sigrise calls out to the squad and tells them to drain the blood and get the bird loaded onto the carriage for the castle. The guards are totally on board, saying they'll handle the processing carefully as a thanks for the great meal, and they head off to finish the job. Sigrise laughs loudly and tells Latu that they really owe everything to the little lady. Latu agrees, saying he's totally right, as he whispers Nomi's name under his breath. He wonders if this crazy boost is just the power of a warm meal, thinking you really can't underestimate it. Latu stands there looking grateful, thanking Nomi in his head and calling her the chief crafter. Back at the castle, Medes takes a bite and yells about how delicious the food is. She's completely blown away by the taste, saying how wonderful it is while staring at her bowl, amazed that something that looked like hardtack became so soft and warm. She looks at her desk and realizes the shape is perfect for keeping at work, holding the bowl up. She's impressed Nomi made something with a long shelf life and great flavor. Medes looks at the meal with stars in her eyes and says it's flawless in every way. Nomi warns the demon lord that the soup might splash and ruin all her important paperwork, so she suggests taking a quick break to eat, since the lord is always stuck in her office eating nothing but boring dried meat. Nomi knew a real meal would help her out, and seeing her enjoy it so much makes Nomi hope this new food stays useful for her long term. Ever since the day those dried soup noodles were first made, they've been working hard on making them easier to carry and store, keeping the recipe simple but perfecting the boiling time. Nomi teamed up with Mr. Makari to figure out the packaging, choosing special mucin leaves from the mountains that people have used to wrap food for ages. These leaves keep things fresh, and with a little magic, they can even vacuum seal the food perfectly. Nomi had the water mages in the kitchen help out with the noodles whenever they had a spare minute, but trying to make enough for everyone at the camp turned into a massive job that started messing with their daily routine. So Nomi just went ahead and built a custom drying pot to speed things up. Nomi looks back on her process, thinking about how she tried using water magic stones for drying but found it way too slow, so she switched things up. She designed a new system using a neutral magic stone combined with a special drying crest she found in her magic book. The test run with Chef Makari goes perfectly. The flavor is spot on, and they celebrate the massive success of their new recipe, which means the mass production setup is finally finished. Nomi holds up the final product, excited that everything is ready to go. She didn't stop there, though. She rigged up a large barrel with a drying board to process all the leftover bones and veggie scraps, turning the waste into fertilizer for the garden. The demon lord is genuinely touched, thanking her for making sure nothing goes to waste. Nomi feels pretty good about herself. By using a press to shape the pots, they can crank them out fast enough for everyone. She looks out at the mountains, just hoping that a warm meal will be enough to lift everyone's spirits back at the camp. Back in the office, the demon lord finishes her meal and just sinks into her chair, calling the whole experience pure bliss. Nomi tells her she's just happy it was a hit and offers to pour some tea, while the lord apologizes for all the extra work. Nomi mentions that despite all the effort, the meal was genuinely delicious. The demon lord is totally on board, agreeing that it tasted amazing, and Nomi explains that the dish is basically the head chef's masterpiece. She tells her they use a ton of high-quality pork bones and spend forever simmering it, making the demon lord admit she's not much of an expert on cooking. Even so, she tells Nomi how grateful she is for the food while she looks down at her cup, wondering just how long it's been since she actually sat down and enjoyed tea after a meal like this. Nomi talks about how there's nothing quite like a warm meal to fix your mood. The demon lord nods along, saying she can literally feel her strength returning to her. Nomi notices a change and tells the demon lord her complexion looks way better than before. The lord seems surprised and asks if she really looks that much healthier, admitting that she honestly can't tell the difference just by looking at herself. However, she's definitely noticed some changes because lately, she's been flying through her mountain of paperwork way faster than usual. She brings up how Nomi once told her that her brain wouldn't function right if she didn't get enough rest. Looking back, she realizes Nomi was right, especially since she's been sleeping like a baby ever since she got that day and night lantern to provide some actual darkness in the room. The demon lord gets super hyped and points right at Nomi, shouting that she's totally right about Yumero. Nomi just winces from the sudden energy, while the lord goes on about how amazing the new setup is. She's thrilled because it apparently spawns way more nightmares than the last dream pillow they used, leaving Nomi looking completely exhausted. She stares off into space, wondering if the demon lord is even going to be able to get any real rest with all those monsters in her head. The demon lord gets a mischievous look in her eye and mentions that she actually hasn't tried out the one made with Garm's fur yet. She figures today is the perfect time to give it a test run and says she honestly can't wait to see how it goes. Nomi doesn't really know how to react to that, so she just gives a pretty awkward and shaky response to keep the conversation moving. As she looks over at the tea set, she tries to convince herself that as long as the demon lord considers these nightmares good dreams, then everything should be fine. The demon lord starts to head out, telling Nomi she's leaving the rest of the work to her as she walks toward the door. Nomi stretches her arms out and lets out a long groan, finally feeling the weight of the day hitting her now that she's alone. She gets back to work and runs her finger down the list, confirming that all the deliveries and inventory management are looking good.